Hey there, wonderful people. Picture yourself standing on a hillside at dawn, watching mist settle into valleys between rolling slopes. That mist, that connecting medium between earth and sky, between one feature and another, is perhaps the closest thing in nature to what we're going to explore tonight. We're going to talk about fascia, the tissue that most of us have never heard of, yet it touches every single part of us, quite literally holding us together in ways that science is only beginning to fully understand. But before we dive in, as always, I'd love it if you could hit that like button and subscribe, as it truly helps the channel grow. Also, feel free to drop a comment, letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now settle in, dim those lights if you can, and let's drift into the fascinating realm of something boring about human anatomy. Now, close your eyes for a moment and imagine your body not as a collection of separate parts, but as a continuous landscape. Because for centuries, anatomists dissected human bodies and carefully catalogued what they found. They named the muscles, traced the pathways of nerves, and mapped the arterial highways and venous return routes. They weighed organs and measured bones. But in all that careful study, they encountered something they largely dismissed as packing material. Between the interesting bits, surrounding the important structures, coating everything like plastic wrap on yesterday's leftovers, was this whitish, filmy tissue. They called it fascia, from the Latin word for band or bundle, and then they scraped it away to get to what they considered the real anatomy underneath. Imagine being the most abundant tissue in the human body and being treated like bubble wrap. But here's where our story takes an interesting turn. In recent decades, researchers have begun to realize that this supposedly boring connective tissue is actually one of the most fascinating and complex systems in the body. It's not packing material at all. It's a living, dynamic network that might be just as important as any organ system we've spent centuries studying. Some scientists now believe fascia deserves to be considered an organ system in its own right, sitting alongside the nervous system, the circulatory system, and all the others we learned about in school. So what exactly is fascia? At its most basic, it's connective tissue, a term that sounds almost dismissive in its simplicity. But let's think about what connection really means in the body. You're not a pile of components sitting in a bag of skin. You're an integrated whole, and something has to create that integration. Fascia is made primarily of collagen fibers, those remarkable proteins that can be both strong and flexible, arranged in patterns that would make a structural engineer weep with envy. These fibers are embedded in a gel-like matrix called ground substance, which is mostly water with various proteins and molecules dissolved in it. Think of it like a very sophisticated Jell-O salad, if you'll forgive the undignified comparison, where the collagen fibers are arranged in precise orientations to handle forces from different directions. The collagen itself is worth pausing over for a moment. It's the most abundant protein in your body, making up about 30% of your total protein content. That's a staggering amount. Collagen molecules are long, rope-like proteins that wind around each other in triple helices, creating structures of remarkable tensile strength. These triple helices then bundle together into fibrils, and fibrils bundle into fibers, and fibers organize into sheets or bands or networks depending on what's needed. It's architecture at the molecular level, self-assembling into exactly the configuration required for each location in the body. Different types of collagen exist, each with slightly different properties. Type I collagen, which is what most fascia is made of, is optimized for tensile strength. It can resist pulling forces beautifully. Type II collagen, found in cartilage, is better at resisting compression. Type III. Collagen is more elastic and is found in higher proportions in organs and blood vessels. Your body deploys exactly the right type of collagen for each job, like a master builder selecting materials. And the fibroblasts, Those cells embedded in the fascia are the builders, constantly maintaining and remodeling the collagen network throughout your life. Now, when we talk about fascia, we're actually talking about several different layers and types, but they're all continuous with each other, all part of one grand body-wide network. Right beneath your skin, there's the superficial fascia, a layer that's actually quite loose and fatty in many places. This is the layer that lets your skin slide over the muscles beneath it. Without it, every time you bent your elbow, your skin would be stretched tight as a drum. Instead, it glides smoothly, and you barely notice the complexity of what's happening. This superficial fascia serves multiple functions beyond just allowing skin mobility. It's also a storage depot for fat, which is actually a form of connective tissue itself. It acts as insulation, helping regulate body temperature. It provides cushioning and protection for the structures beneath, and it contains blood vessels and lymphatic vessels that serve the skin. In some areas of the body, this layer is quite thick. In others, it's barely present. The superficial fascia of your abdomen, for instance, can be several centimeters thick in some people, while the superficial fascia over your shin is much thinner, which is why hitting your shin hurts so distinctly. There's not much padding there. Go deeper, and you find the deep fascia, which wraps around muscles like individual sausage casings. But it doesn't stop there. It also wraps around groups of muscles, creating compartments. It wraps around bones. It wraps around organs. It wraps around blood vessels and nerves. Imagine gift wrapping a present, then gift wrapping several wrapped presents together, and then putting all of those into a larger wrapped package, and then wrapping that entire collection again. That's something like the architecture of fascia. Each structure gets its own wrapping, groups get wrapped together, and the whole collection is wrapped again. It's wrapping all the way down and all the way up. But here's what makes it truly remarkable. All of these layers of wrapping aren't separate sheets. They're continuous with each other. A sheet of fascia that wraps around a muscle in your calf doesn't end at the knee. It continues, transforms, merges with other fascial sheets, and connects to structures throughout your entire body. There's a genuine physical connection between the fascia in your foot and the fascia in your neck. Pull on one end of this vast web, and the tension can be transmitted to distant locations. This isn't mystical or metaphorical. It's mechanical reality. Let me paint you a picture that might help this sink in. Imagine a circus tent, one of those massive old-fashioned canvas tents. The tent doesn't stand up because the canvas is rigid. It stands because of a carefully designed network of tension and compression. The canvas is under tension, pulling against tent poles that are under compression. Guy lines run out to stakes in the ground. If you adjust one guy line, the entire shape of the tent changes subtly. If you pull on the canvas at one point, that pull is distributed through the entire structure. Your body works on similar principles. Your bones are like the tent poles, compression elements that are held in place by the tension network of fascia and muscles. This is called tensegrity, a portmanteau of tension and integrity, and it's a concept borrowed from architecture that describes your body better than the old idea of bones, stacked on bones like a building's framework. You're not a tower. You're a suspended system, held in dynamic balance by carefully distributed forces. Right now, as you lie there listening to this, your fascia is maintaining that balance, keeping you together, and distributing loads and forces in ways that prevent any one structure from being overwhelmed. The architect Buckminster Fuller popularized tensegrity structures, creating sculptures where rigid elements floated in space, held in position purely by the tension of cables connecting them. No rigid element touched another rigid element. It seemed almost magical, like the structure was defying gravity, but it was just physics, forces in balance. Your skeleton works somewhat like this. Your bones don't actually stack directly on each other at most joints. They're held in relationship by the tension of muscles, tendons, ligaments, and fascia. Take away the soft tissue, and the skeleton collapses into a pile. The soft tissue is what creates the standing upright form. The collagen fibers in fascia are arranged in different patterns depending on what they need to do. In some places they run in parallel, like the grain in wood, creating strength in one direction. The iliotibial band, on the outside of your thigh for instance, which is really just a thickened band of fascia, has fibers running mostly parallel to handle the tremendous forces of walking and running. In other places, the fibers are arranged in a mesh or felt-like pattern, providing strength in multiple directions. The fascia covering your abdominal muscles has multiple layers with fibers running in different directions, creating a flexible but strong container for your internal organs. And here's something wonderful. Fascia is alive. It's not like leather or rope, dead tissue that just sits there. It has cells called fibroblasts that constantly maintain and remodel the collagen network. These fibroblasts are remarkable little factories, synthesizing new collagen molecules, secreting enzymes that break down old collagen, adjusting the composition of the ground substance, and responding to mechanical signals from the tissue around them. They sense tension and respond to it. Put more load on fascia, and the fibroblasts will, over time, strengthen it. Remove the load and they'll thin it out. Your fascia adapts to the demands you place on it. It has blood vessels feeding it, bringing oxygen and nutrients, and carrying away waste products. The density of blood vessels varies. Some fascial structures are quite vascularized, while others have fewer blood vessels and receive their nutrition more through diffusion from surrounding tissues. This affects healing time when fascia is injured. Well-vascularized fascia heals faster than poorly vascularized fascia. The thoracolumbar fascia, in your lower back for instance, is reasonably well supplied with blood. In contrast, the fascia of tendons, which are really just specialized continuations of muscle fascia that attach to bone, often has relatively poor blood supply, which is why tendon injuries can take so long to heal. And fascia has nerve endings, many, more nerve endings than scientists suspected until quite recently. In fact, fascia might be one of the richest sensory organs in your entire body. It's absolutely packed with mechanoreceptors, specialized nerve endings that detect pressure, stretch, and movement. There are several types of mechanoreceptors in fascia. Ruffini endings respond to sustained pressure and stretching. Pacinian corpuscles detect rapid vibrations and changes in pressure. Golgi tendon organs, which are actually located in the fascial connections between muscles and tendons, sense tension and help prevent you from overloading your muscles. There are also free nerve endings that can sense pain when tissue is damaged or under excessive stress. When you stretch, much of what you're feeling isn't actually in the muscle fibers themselves, but in the fascial sheaths surrounding and interpenetrating the muscles. The muscle fibers themselves have relatively few pain receptors. The fascia is what's talking to you when you feel that stretching sensation, that sense of resistance, and then gradual yielding. This has profound implications for how we understand proprioception, that mysterious sense of where your body is in space. You know where your hand is right now, even with your eyes closed. You know whether your knee is bent or straight. That knowledge comes partly from your muscles and joints, yes, but also from the vast sensory network woven through your fascia. Close your eyes and move your hand slowly through the air. Notice how you know exactly where it is, what shape it's making, and how it's oriented in space. That's proprioception, and fascia is whispering much of that information to your nervous system. The mechanoreceptors in your fascia are sensing the changing tensions and positions, sending a constant stream of information up to your brain. Your brain integrates all this input and creates your sense of embodiment, your feeling of inhabiting a body that has position and movement and form. Some researchers believe fascia might even play a role in pain that has puzzled doctors for generations. You've probably heard of phantom limb pain, where someone who has lost an arm or leg still feels pain in the missing limb. Or perhaps you know someone with chronic pain that moves around the body, is never quite pinned to one location, and is resistant to treatment. The fascial network, with its body-wide connections and dense sensory innervation, might help explain these phenomena. Pain in one area might actually originate from tension or restriction in the fascial web somewhere else entirely, possibly far from where you feel it. This is called referred pain, and while it's been known about for a long time, the mechanisms are still being understood. Part of the explanation is that nerve pathways converge in the spinal cord, so the brain can sometimes misinterpret where signals are coming from. But the physical continuity of fascia adds another dimension. Tension or restriction in one part of the fascial web creates mechanical stress in other parts, and those other parts might be where pain is ultimately perceived. It's like having a snag in a sweater. The snag is in one place, but it causes pulling and distortion elsewhere in the garment. Let's travel down this network for a moment, following one particular fascial highway through the body. We'll start at the bottom of your foot. The plantar fascia runs along the sole, a thick band that acts like the string on a bow, helping maintain the arch and spring in your step. You can feel this if you press into the sole of your foot right now. That firm, slightly resistant feeling is the plantar fascia. When you stand, this fascia is under considerable tension, supporting a large portion of your body weight. When you walk or run, it stretches and recoils with each step, storing and releasing elastic energy. Plantar fasciitis, one of the most common causes of heel pain, is inflammation or degeneration of this fascia, often from overuse or excessive loading. People who develop plantar fasciitis often discover that the pain is worst when they first get out of bed in the morning. During the night, the fascia has shortened and stiffened slightly, and those first steps stretch it abruptly, causing pain. As they walk around, the fascia warms up and becomes more pliable, and the pain often decreases. This pattern is typical of fascial issues, worse with initial movement, improving as the tissue warms and hydrates. This plantar fascia doesn't end at your heel. It continues up the back of the leg as part of the fascial network surrounding the Achilles tendon and calf muscles. The Achilles tendon itself, the thickest and strongest tendon in your body, is really just a specialized band of fascia connecting your calf muscles to your heel bone. It can handle tremendous forces, multiple times your body weight during running or jumping, because of the parallel arrangement and density of its collagen fibers. Follow the fascial pathway further, and it continues behind the knee where it merges with the fascia surrounding the hamstrings in the back of your thigh. The hamstrings themselves are wrapped in fascia, and they're also connected to each other and to neighboring structures by fascial sheets. Everything is wrapped. Everything is connected. The fascia continues up to your sit bones, those bony prominences you're sitting on if you're in a chair, and connects to a thick ligament called the sacrotuberous ligament. Now, ligaments are often taught as structures separate from fascia, but really they're just specialized thickenings of fascia that connect bone to bone. The distinction is somewhat arbitrary, a product of our tendency to name and categorize. At the tissue level, a ligament and a fascial sheet are made of the same stuff, organized collagen. They just have different shapes and slightly different organizations of fibers based on their function. From the sacrotuberous ligament, our fascial journey continues into the thoracolumbar fascia, a massive diamond-shaped sheet across your lower back. This is one of the largest facial structures in the body, and it's remarkably complex. It has multiple layers, with fibers running in different directions in each layer. The deep layer attaches to the lumbar vertebrae and provides stability to the spine. The middle layer is between the muscles of your back. The superficial layer is the outermost and connects to the latissimus dorsi muscles, those broad muscles in your back that help with pulling and reaching movements. The thoracolumbar fascia is now recognized as crucial for spinal stability and force transmission. When you lift something heavy, forces don't just flow through your spine, they're distributed through the thoracolumbar fascia to your pelvis and rib cage, creating a hydraulic system of sorts. When your deep core muscles contract, they create pressure that stiffens this fascial structure, stabilizing your spine without requiring excessive muscle force. It's elegant engineering, reducing the metabolic cost of maintaining upright posture and allowing you to lift and carry loads efficiently. From the thoracolumbar fascia, connections continue up the back, merging with the fascia of the erector spinae, muscles that run along your spine. These connections extend all the way up to the base of your skull, where the fascia connects to the occiput, the bone at the back of your head. From there, fascial connections extend over the top of your skull and even connect to the dura mater, the tough membrane covering your brain. This means there's a continuous line of fascia from the bottom of your foot to the top of your head. It's been called the superficial back line, one of several myofascial meridians that researchers, particularly Thomas Myers, who wrote a foundational book on this subject, have mapped through the body. These meridians aren't separate structures like blood vessels or nerves. They're descriptive models, ways of understanding the patterns of fascial continuity that exist throughout the body. Now, before you start thinking this sounds like ancient meridian maps from traditional Chinese medicine, understand that these are different concepts with different theoretical foundations. But it is interesting that various cultures, using different methods and frameworks, have all intuited that the body has pathways and connections beyond just the obvious ones. The Chinese concept of meridians involves energy flow and has no direct anatomical correspondence in the way we understand anatomy. But the idea that there are longitudinal connections in the body, that distant parts influence each other through pathways, that's something both systems recognize, even if they're describing different underlying realities or using different conceptual models. Here's a practical example of how these connections matter. You've probably known someone who had chronic lower back pain that improved when they started stretching their hamstrings, or plantar fasciitis in the foot that was helped by releasing tension in the calves. These seemingly disconnected improvements make perfect sense when you understand the fascial continuity. Restriction or excess tension at one point in the network affects the entire line. Your body compensates beautifully for a while, redistributing forces, altering movement patterns slightly, until one day the compensation breaks down and you feel pain, often far from the original problem. A person might have tight calves for years, perhaps from wearing high heels regularly or from a previous ankle injury that never fully resolved. The body compensates. The fascia gradually adapts to the restricted length, but that adaptation has consequences upstream. The hamstrings might gradually tighten to match. The pelvis might tilt slightly to accommodate the altered tension. The lower back might develop a protective tension pattern. For years, this works well enough. Then one day they bend over to pick up something light and their back goes into spasm. The problem isn't the bending. The problem is the accumulated fascial restriction and compensation pattern that finally exceeded the system's ability to cope. Now let's talk about what happens when you move. Every movement you make is a conversation between your nervous system, your muscles, and your fascia. When your brain sends a signal to contract a muscle, the muscle fibers shorten. But they don't just pull on the bones directly. They pull on the fascial sheets that surround them, and those sheets pull on other sheets, and the force is distributed through the network. It's like pulling on a bed sheet at one corner. The whole sheet moves, not just the part you grabbed. This distribution system is remarkably efficient. It means that no single structure has to bear all the load. It also means that you can generate force in ways that seem to defy simple mechanical analysis. Watch a skilled athlete throw a ball. The force doesn't originate in the arm. It begins with a push from the legs, travels through a rotation of the hips, is amplified by a turn of the torso, channeled through the shoulder, and finally expressed through the arm and hand. The fascial network is what allows this kinetic chain to work. It's a continuous medium through which force waves can travel. Think about cracking a whip. The handle moves relatively slowly, but that movement creates a wave that travels down the whip, getting faster and faster until the tip moves so quickly it breaks the sound barrier, creating that distinctive crack. Your body can do something similar, though not quite as dramatically. The fascia allows forces to summate and amplify as they travel from larger, slower moving parts to smaller, faster moving parts. A pitcher's fastball or a martial artist's strike uses this principle. The speed and force at the end of the chain are far greater than what the arm muscles alone could produce. There's something almost musical about it. Your body is like an instrument, with fascia forming the structure that allows vibrations and forces to resonate through it. In fact, some body workers talk about listening to the fascia with their hands, feeling the quality of the tissue and sensing where it's tight or restricted and where it flows freely and where it doesn't. While this might sound esoteric, there's growing scientific support for the idea that fascia has measurably different qualities in different states. Healthy, hydrated fascia is slippery and mobile. It has a certain spring and responsiveness when touched. Restricted fascia is sticky and stiff. It doesn't slide as easily. It resists deformation differently. Skilled manual therapists develop extraordinary sensitivity in their hands. They can detect subtle differences in tissue texture and resistance. They can feel the direction of fascial pull. They can sense where tissue is held in tension and where it's slack. This isn't magic or energy work, though it might be described that way sometimes. It's refined tactile perception and pattern recognition developed through thousands of hours of putting hands on bodies and paying attention to what the tissue feels like. Hydration, it turns out, is crucial to facial health. Remember that ground substance, the gel matrix that the collagen fibers sit in? It's mostly water, and it needs to be. When fascia is well hydrated, the layers can slide over each other smoothly. The ground substance is liquid enough to allow movement between fascial planes. The collagen fibers can reorient themselves in response to forces. The whole system works the way it's supposed to. When fascia becomes dehydrated, which can happen from inactivity, poor systemic hydration, inflammation, or injury, the ground substance becomes more viscous, more glue-like. The layers start to stick together. Movement becomes restricted. Think about honey on a cold day versus honey that's been warmed. Cold honey is stiff and barely flows. Warm honey is liquid and moves easily. Your fascia can transition between states something like this, though the mechanisms are more complex than just temperature. The ground substance contains various glycosaminoglycans, long sugar molecules that attract and hold water. Hyaluronic acid is one of the most important of these. It can hold up to 1,000 times its weight in water, making it a crucial component of the lubricating system between fascial layers. When you move, you create shear forces between fascial layers, and this mechanical stimulation encourages the fibroblasts to maintain a healthy ground substance composition. Movement literally helps keep the lubricating gel at the right consistency. Inactivity has the opposite effect. The ground substance can become more viscous and adhesive. This is one reason why movement is so important for maintaining healthy fascia, and why people who sit still for long periods often feel stiff when they try to move. You're not just warming the muscles, you're affecting the viscosity of the fascial ground substance, making it more pliable and more responsive. It's also why stretching often feels better after you've warmed up. You're not just warming the muscles in the sense of raising their temperature, though that happens too. You're affecting the behavior of fascia. The ground substance becomes more fluid, the mechanoreceptors recalibrate, the nervous system adjusts its protective responses. And here's something that challenges old ideas about stretching. You might not be permanently lengthening muscles or fascia when you stretch regularly. Instead, you might be teaching your nervous system to tolerate more length, changing the signals that tell your muscles when to resist a stretch. You're reprogramming the sensors in the fascia, adjusting the thermostat, so to speak. This is why gains in flexibility can be lost relatively quickly if you stop stretching. You haven't permanently remodeled the tissue in just a few weeks of stretching. You've trained your nervous system to allow more range of motion. Stop training, and the nervous system gradually returns to its previous protective settings. True fascial remodeling happens over months, not weeks, as the fibroblasts gradually reorganize the collagen network. But neurological changes in stretch tolerance can happen much faster, which is both good news and a reminder that flexibility requires consistent practice to maintain. The fascia around your organs, called visceral fascia, deserves its own extended consideration. Your organs aren't just floating freely in your body cavity like fish in an aquarium. That's a common misconception. Each organ is suspended in fascial wrappings, held in relationship to the others, and able to move and slide as you breathe and move, yet maintained in proper position. Your lungs are surrounded by pleural membranes, which are specialized fascia. There's a space between the layers called the pleural cavity, but it's not really empty space. It contains a thin film of fluid that allows the layers to slide over each other with minimal friction when you breathe. Your heart sits in a fascial sac called the pericardium. This is a double-layered membrane with the inner layer adhered to the heart muscle and the outer layer connected to surrounding structures. Between the layers is a small amount of fluid that lubricates heart movement. The pericardium serves multiple functions. It reduces friction as the heart beats. It prevents the heart from overfilling with blood. It provides some protection from infection, and it anchors the heart in position within the chest cavity through its fascial connections to the sternum, the vertebrae, and the diaphragm. Your intestines, all 30 feet or so of them if you could stretch them out, are wrapped and suspended by the mesentery, a massive fascial structure that was only recently recognized as deserving organ status itself. For centuries, the mesentery was thought of as a fragmented structure, separate sheets of connective tissue here and there. But recent research has shown that it's actually one continuous organ, a complex folded structure that contains blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, and nerves serving the entire length of the intestines. The mesentery allows your intestines to move, which they need to do. Your intestines are constantly in motion, the peristaltic waves that move food through your digestive tract, creating shifting and sliding throughout your abdomen. The mesentery's fascial suspension system allows this movement while maintaining the intestines in proper relationship to each other and to the blood supply that feeds them. When you see a surgeon's view of the abdominal cavity during surgery, what looks like glistening, translucent sheets draped over the intestines is the mesentery. That's visceral fascia in action. This visceral fascia connects to the fascia of your body wall, the deep fascia around your muscles. This means that the position and state of your organs can influence your musculoskeletal system, and your posture and movement can influence your organs. It's a two-way conversation. If you've ever noticed that you breathe more deeply when you stand up straight versus when you're slumped over, you're experiencing this connection. The fascial relationships between your ribs, your spine, your diaphragm, and your lungs all change with your posture, and breathing capacity changes as a result. The diaphragm itself warrants extended discussion because it's a perfect example of fascial complexity and integration. The diaphragm isn't just a muscle. It's a muscle embedded in a fascial system that connects to your spine, your ribs, your sternum, the fascia surrounding your organs, and even structures far from the diaphragm itself. The central part of the diaphragm is a flat sheet of fascia called the central tendon. The muscle fibers of the diaphragm radiate out from this central tendon and attach to the skeleton at multiple points. When you breathe in, your diaphragm contracts. The muscle fibers shorten, pulling the central tendon down. This expands the chest cavity, creating negative pressure that draws air into your lungs. But the movement of the diaphragm does much more than just facilitate breathing. As it descends, it creates a pressure wave that moves through your entire core, gently massaging your organs, moving fluids through the lymphatic system, and stimulating the fascia throughout your trunk. The fascia of the diaphragm connects to the fascia around your liver, your stomach, your esophagus, and your kidneys. When the diaphragm moves, all these structures move slightly with it. This is one reason why breathing practices have such profound effects. You're not just oxygenating your blood, though that's obviously important. You're moving your fascia, stimulating mechanoreceptors throughout your core, and affecting the nervous system through direct mechanical means. Each breath is a wave moving through your fascial ocean, maintaining mobility, supporting fluid movement, and providing gentle mechanical stimulation to organs and tissues. The diaphragm also has extensive fascial connections to the psoas muscles, those deep hip flexors that run from your lumbar spine down to your inner thigh bones. The fascia of the diaphragm and the fascia of the psoas are continuous with each other, sharing attachments on the lumbar vertebrae. This connection is why breathing patterns and hip mobility can influence each other. Tight psoas muscles can restrict diaphragm movement. Shallow breathing patterns can contribute to psoas tension. Work on one and you affect the other. There's also a connection between diaphragm function and the pelvic floor, that hammock of muscles and fascia at the bottom of your pelvis that supports your pelvic organs. The diaphragm and pelvic floor work in coordination. When your diaphragm descends on an inhale, your pelvic floor should relax and descend slightly. When your diaphragm ascends on an exhale, your pelvic floor should engage and rise slightly. They're like opposite ends of a cylinder, working in synchronized opposition to manage pressure in the core. When this coordination breaks down, which can happen from chronic stress, trauma, poor breathing patterns, or various medical conditions, it can lead to a host of issues ranging from back pain to pelvic organ prolapse to bladder control problems. The fascial system is deeply involved in this coordination. The fascia of the diaphragm, the fascia of the abdominal wall, and the fascia of the pelvic floor all form an integrated container, and the state of each part affects the function of the whole. Now let's venture into the realm of the face and head, where fascia takes on particularly delicate and complex forms. The fascia here is continuous with the fascia of the neck and the rest of the body, but it has specialized structures adapted to the unique requirements of the head. There's fascia around each of the muscles of facial expression, those dozens of tiny muscles that create the incredible range of human expression. Most muscles in your body attach to two bones and move joints, but facial muscles often attach on one end to bone and on the other end to skin or to other muscles, allowing them to create the subtle and not so subtle movements that communicate emotion and intent. The fascia is what transmits the pull of these muscles to the skin, creating the lines and creases, the smiles and frowns, and the raised eyebrows and squinted eyes that make human faces so expressive. This fascia is multi-layered and continuous with itself, creating a flexible but coherent structure. Under the skin of your face is a layer called the superficial musculo-aponeurotic system, or SMAS, which is really a fascial layer with some muscle fibers embedded in it. This layer is what plastic surgeons manipulate during facelift procedures, tightening it to reduce sagging. Below that are deeper fascial layers surrounding individual facial muscles. There's fascia around your jaw muscles, the masseter and temporalis, some of the strongest muscles in your body for their size. These muscles can generate tremendous force for chewing, and their fascia has to handle that force. The temporalis fascia, which covers the temporalis muscle on the side of your head, is particularly strong and has attachments to your skull and your cheekbone. You can feel this fascia if you clench your teeth and feel the bulge of muscle at your temple. That firm sheet under your fingers is the temporalis fascia. Your jaw joint, the temporomandibular joint, or TMJ, is surrounded by fascia and ligaments. Problems with this joint, which are quite common and can cause pain, clicking, and limited opening, often involve the fascial structures around the joint as much as the joint surfaces themselves. The fascia can become restricted, the muscles can develop chronic tension patterns, and the entire complex can become dysfunctional. Treatment often needs to address not just the joint, but the entire fascial and muscular system of the jaw, neck, and sometimes even the shoulders and upper back, because everything is connected. There's fascia covering your skull, a thin but tough layer called the galea aponeurotica that connects the muscles on your forehead to the muscles at the back of your head. This is what allows some people to wiggle their ears or move their entire scalp. The degree of mobility varies considerably between individuals. Some people can barely move their scalp at all. Others have remarkable control and can move it dramatically. That variation reflects partly the state of their fascia, how mobile or restricted it is, and partly their neural control over the muscles that attach to it. Deep inside, there's the dura mater, the tough fascial covering of the brain itself. The dura mater is particularly interesting. It's a thick inelastic membrane that provides protection for the brain and spinal cord. There are actually 2 layers to the dura in most places, fused together but separable. Between the layers in certain locations are the dural venous sinuses, channels through which venous blood drains from the brain. The dura also has an extensive nerve supply, and irritation of the dura is thought to be one source of headache pain. The dura mater is continuous with the coverings of the spinal cord, extending all the way down to your sacrum, that triangular bone at the base of your spine. This means there's a direct fascial connection from your skull to your pelvis, a central axis of the fascial system. The spinal cord itself floats in cerebrospinal fluid within this dural sheath, cushioned and protected. But the dura isn't just a passive container. It has attachments to the vertebrae at various points down the spine, and these attachments create mechanical relationships between the skull, the spine, and the pelvis. Some practitioners, particularly in craniosacral therapy, believe that restrictions in this central fascial tube can affect everything from headaches to back pain to balance and coordination. They work with very gentle manipulations aimed at releasing these restrictions and improving the mobility of the craniosacral system. Mainstream medicine has generally been skeptical of these claims, partly because the mechanism is unclear, and partly because the forces used in craniosacral therapy are so gentle, it's hard to imagine they could have significant mechanical effects. However, the anatomical connections are undeniable, and there is some research suggesting that craniosacral therapy can have measurable effects, even if we don't fully understand how. It's possible that the very gentle forces used in this work are communicating with the nervous system rather than creating direct mechanical changes. The mechanoreceptors in fascia are exquisitely sensitive and can detect extremely subtle stimuli. A light touch that feels like it couldn't possibly move tissue might nonetheless be creating signals that travel to the nervous system and trigger responses. The fascia of the central nervous system is continuous with the rest of the body's fascial network, creating relationships between the head, spine, and pelvis that can have functional consequences. Your face, in a sense, is where your interior meets the world. The fascia here is the most visible manifestation of the network that pervades your entire body. When you smile, dozens of facial layers slide and shift. When you chew, fascial connections to your jaw transmit forces in complex patterns. Even the fascia of your scalp is significant. You can probably move your scalp slightly right now if you try. That mobility exists because of the fascial layer beneath it. Some people can barely move their scalp. Others can move it dramatically. That variation reflects the state of their fascia, how mobile or restricted it is. There's emerging research on facial fascia and aging that's quite fascinating. As we age, the fascial layers of the face can become less hydrated and more adherent to each other and to underlying structures. This contributes to some of the visible signs of aging, possibly as much as changes in the skin itself. The face begins to sag, not just because skin loses elasticity, but because the facial support structure changes. The fat compartments in the face, which are separated by fascial walls, can deflate or migrate. The fascial attachments that hold these compartments in place can weaken or stretch. Some practitioners are now working with facial fascia manually, using techniques ranging from gentle holds to deeper tissue work, claiming to restore some youthfulness through improving fascial mobility and hydration. Whether this works as well as claimed is still being studied, but the anatomical logic is sound. If facial aging is partly a fascial phenomenon, then interventions that improve fascial health might have visible effects. This is different from simply moisturizing the skin surface or using cosmetic procedures that target only the skin. It's addressing a deeper structural layer. Let's return to the broader picture. One of the most profound implications of understanding fascia is how it changes our view of the body as a whole. The old model of anatomy, inherited from centuries of dissection, was necessarily reductionist. It broke the body into parts, catalogued them, named them, and studied them separately. This approach has been incredibly valuable and has led to most of modern medicine, but it has limitations. It can make us think of the body as a machine with replaceable parts, which it is not. It can make us miss the relationships between structures, the connections that might be just as important as the structures themselves. Fascia reveals a body that is fundamentally relational. Nothing exists in isolation. Every structure is connected to every other structure through this living network. This has practical implications for how we think about health, injury, and healing. An injury to one area affects the whole network. The body compensates, redistributing forces and altering movement patterns. Often these compensations work brilliantly for years, then one day they don't, and pain appears, frequently far from the original injury. Someone might sprain their ankle badly at age 20. It heals, or seems to, and they think nothing more of it. But the fascia around that ankle has been altered. It's tighter on one side, the range of motion is slightly reduced, and the proprioceptive signaling is subtly different. The body compensates beautifully. The knee adjusts its movement pattern slightly. The hip does too. The lower back takes on a little more rotational stress. For 15 years this works fine. Then at age 35, they bend over to tie their shoe and their back goes into spasm. They think the problem is their back. They might get treatment focused on the back, which might help temporarily. But the root issue, the original disruption in the fascial network, was that ankle injury 15 years ago. Unless that's addressed, unless the fascial restrictions around the ankle are released and normal movement patterns restored, the back pain is likely to recur. This is why skilled manual therapists often work far from where pain is felt, following the threads of the fascial web to find the primary restrictions. This doesn't mean that every problem has a single cause that can be found and fixed. The body is far too complex for such simple solutions. But it does mean that looking at pain and dysfunction through the lens of fascial continuity can reveal patterns and relationships that wouldn't be apparent otherwise. It expands the therapeutic possibilities beyond just treating symptoms at the site of pain. Consider the implications for athletes and performers. When someone trains for a sport, they're not just building muscle strength or cardiovascular endurance, though those matter enormously. They're also training the fascial network to efficiently transmit and store forces. Fascia can store and release elastic energy, like a spring. This property, called viscoelasticity, makes many movements more efficient than they would be if muscles had to generate all the force actively. A runner's Achilles tendon, which is really a specialized continuation of the calf muscle fascia, stores energy during the landing phase of each stride and releases it during push-off. This elastic recoil can provide a significant portion of the energy needed for running, reducing the metabolic cost. The better your fascia is at storing and releasing energy, the more efficient your running becomes. This is part of why experienced runners often have better economy than beginners, even at the same fitness level. Their fascial system has adapted to running, becoming more elastic and responsive. The plantar fascia in the foot does something similar. When your foot lands, the arch compresses slightly and the plantar fascia stretches, storing energy. As you push off, the arch springs back and the fascia recoils, contributing to forward propulsion. Shoes with very thick, soft soles can actually interfere with this mechanism by preventing normal arch compression and fascia loading. This is one argument for minimalist footwear or even barefoot running, though the transition to less supportive shoes needs to be gradual to allow the fascial system time to adapt. The best athletes often have particularly elastic, responsive fascia. This is partly genetic. Some people are naturally more flexible and springy, but it's also trainable to some extent. Plyometric exercises, which involve bouncing and explosive movements, train the fascial system to store and release energy quickly. When you do a depth jump, dropping from a height and immediately jumping back up, you're training your fascia to handle rapid loading and recoiling. This is different from slow strength training, which is more about muscle fiber recruitment and force production. Both have their place, but they're training different aspects of the musculoskeletal system. Dancers know this intuitively. A skilled dancer doesn't just use muscles, they use their whole body as an integrated, elastic system. They understand in their body, if not in words, that movement originates from the center and flows out through the limbs, and that the quality of movement depends on the state of the whole system, not just the strength of individual muscles. This holistic sense of movement is deeply connected to the fascial architecture of the body. When a dancer leaps, they're using fascial elasticity in their legs and feet. When they extend their arms, they're creating a continuous line of tension through the fascial web from their center out to their fingertips. There's a concept in dance and somatic practices called tensional integrity in movement, which is really just another way of talking about fascia and tensegrity. The idea is that movement isn't about isolated muscle contractions pulling on bones. It's about creating and releasing patterns of tension through a continuous network, with the skeleton providing compression support within that tension network. This creates movement that is fluid, efficient, and integrated. It's the difference between moving like a robot, with isolated joint actions, and moving like water, with everything flowing together. Musicians, particularly those who play instruments that require fine motor control and endurance, also have special relationships with their fascia. A concert pianist might play for 2 hours, executing thousands of precise finger movements. The fascia of their hands, forearms, and shoulders must be exquisitely organized to allow this level of control and endurance without injury. Repetitive strain injuries in musicians often involve fascial restrictions and imbalances. Treatment approaches that address fascia alongside muscle rehabilitation often have better outcomes than those that focus on muscles alone. As we age, fascia changes in ways that contribute to many of the things we associate with getting older. It becomes less hydrated and less elastic. The collagen fibers accumulate more crosslinks, chemical bonds that form between collagen molecules, making the tissue stiffer. The proportion of elastic fibers decreases relative to collagen. The fascial layers become more adherent to each other. The fibroblasts become less active and less responsive to mechanical stimulation. The ground substance becomes less fluid. These changes contribute to decreased flexibility, slower movement, increased stiffness, and reduced resilience to stress. When a young person falls, they often bounce back up with no injury. When an older person falls, they're much more likely to suffer a serious injury. This isn't just because bones become more brittle with age, though that's certainly a factor. It's also because the fascial system becomes less able to absorb and distribute forces. The tissue is stiffer, less able to deform without damage, and less able to cushion impact. But here's some good news. Many of these changes are not inevitable. They're partly the result of decreased movement. Bodies that keep moving in varied, dynamic ways throughout life maintain better fascial health than bodies that don't. The mechanical stimulation from movement signals the fibroblasts to maintain the tissue in a functional state. The shearing forces between fascial layers that occur during movement keep the ground substance fluid. The loading and unloading cycles maintain tissue hydration. This doesn't mean you need to be an athlete or do intense exercise, though those can certainly be beneficial if done sensibly. It means you need to move regularly in varied ways through a full range of motion. Reaching overhead, squatting down, twisting, bending, and moving in all the planes your body is designed for. Modern life often locks us into repetitive patterns. We sit in chairs designed to support certain postures. We look at screens positioned at fixed distances and angles. We repeat the same movements day after day, whether at work, in exercise routines, or in daily activities. Fascia adapts to this. It reorganizes to support the positions and movements we do most often. If those positions are limited, our fascia becomes specialized for limitation. The collagen fibers align with the forces we regularly apply. The fascial layers in planes we don't use develop adhesions. Our range of motion gradually decreases, not because we've fundamentally lost capacity, but because the fascial system has adapted to a restricted movement diet. But fascia can also adapt the other way. Start moving more, start moving differently, and fascia will gradually reorganize to support that new movement. It takes time. Fascia remodels slowly, over weeks and months, not days. The fibroblasts need time to break down old collagen and synthesize new collagen in different orientations. The ground substance needs time to change its composition. The neurological patterns need time to reprogram. But it does happen. You're never too old to improve your facial health, though the older you are, the more patient you need to be with the process. Research on centenarians, people who live to 100 or beyond, often reveals that they tend to be people who stayed physically active throughout their lives, not necessarily athletes or fitness enthusiasts, but people who walked, gardened, did physical work, and stayed engaged with their bodies. Their fascia, presumably, remained healthier longer, contributing to their continued mobility and independence. There's a saying, the secret to aging well is to keep moving. From a fiscal perspective, this is profound wisdom. Sleep position affects fascia too, which might interest you at this particular moment as you lie here listening. If you sleep in the same position night after night, the fascia adapts to that position. You're spending a third of your life in one configuration, and your body takes that seriously. This is one reason why some people feel stiff when they wake up, especially as they age. The fascia has adapted to the sleeping position, and it takes a while to rehydrate and mobilize when you get up. The ground substance has become more viscous during the night, partly because you haven't been moving. The fascial layers have settled into their nighttime configuration. Your first movements in the morning are essentially remobilizing the fascial system, coaxing it back into daytime functionality. This is normal, but it's also something you can influence by varying your sleeping position when possible, and by engaging in gentle movement when you first wake up. Stretching, taking a few deep breaths, and moving through some ranges of motion before jumping out of bed, these can help ease the transition and reduce morning stiffness. Hydration itself is worth emphasizing again because it's such a simple but powerful intervention. The state of your fascia is directly related to how hydrated you are systemically. Drink enough water and you're helping maintain the health of this vast network throughout your body. The ground substance needs water to maintain its proper gel consistency. The fibroblasts need adequate hydration to function optimally. Even the sliding between fascial layers depends on proper hydration to maintain the lubricating film between layers. Chronic dehydration doesn't just affect your kidneys or your skin or give you headaches. It affects the ground substance of your fascia throughout your body, potentially contributing to stiffness, pain, and reduced function. When tissues are dehydrated, they become less pliable, less resilient, and more prone to injury. Imagine trying to bend a piece of leather that's been dried out versus leather that's been properly conditioned with oil. The dried leather cracks. The conditioned leather flexes smoothly. Your fascia needs water to maintain its flexibility. The amount of water you need varies based on your size, activity level, climate, and individual factors. The old advice of 8 glasses a day is a rough guideline but not a magic number. A better approach is to pay attention to your body's signals and to your urine colour. Pale yellow suggests good hydration. Dark yellow suggests you need more water. It's a simple intervention, but a real one with measurable effects on facial health. Let's talk for a moment about the emotional dimension of fascia. This might seem strange at first. How could a physical tissue have an emotional component? But remember that fascia is richly innervated, full of nerve endings that communicate with your brain. The state of your fascia influences the signals your nervous system receives. When fascia is restricted or chronically tense, it might contribute to a felt sense of being constricted, held, or armoured. When fascia is mobile and fluid, that might contribute to feeling physically free, easy, and open. Moreover, there's growing recognition that the body holds memory in some sense, not in the mystical way sometimes claimed, but in the physical organization of tissue and in learned nervous system responses. Trauma, whether physical or emotional, can leave its mark not just in the mind but in the body, in patterns of tension and protection that become encoded in the musculoskeletal system, including fascia. When you experience something threatening, your body contracts, pulling inward, protecting vulnerable areas. This is an automatic response, orchestrated by the nervous system. If the threat passes and you have a chance to discharge that tension, to shake it off literally or figuratively, the protective pattern releases and you return to your baseline state. But if the threat is ongoing, or if for some reason you can't discharge the tension, the protective pattern can become chronic. The muscles stay contracted. The fascia adapts to the contracted state, reorganizing to support it. What began as a temporary protective response becomes a structural holding pattern. This is part of why body-centered therapies can sometimes help people work through emotional issues that talk therapy alone might not fully resolve. Changing the physical state can influence the emotional state and vice versa. They're not separate systems operating independently. They're aspects of one integrated whole, constantly influencing each other. Your psychological state affects your posture, your breathing, your muscle tension, and therefore your fascia. Your facial state, through its extensive sensory network, influences your nervous system and thereby your psychological state. It's a loop, a feedback system with no clear starting point. People who work with trauma survivors sometimes observe that as physical restrictions release during bodywork, emotional releases can occur. Someone might suddenly feel sadness or anger or fear rising up. They might have memories surface that they hadn't thought about in years. This isn't the bodywork creating those emotions or memories. It's allowing emotions that were somehow bound up with physical holding patterns to come to the surface where they can be felt and processed. The fascia served as part of the container, and changing the container changes what happens to the contents. This is delicate territory, and I'm not suggesting that fascia is where emotions are stored in some simplistic way, like files in a cabinet. The relationship is more subtle and complex, but the mind-body connection is real, and fascia, as a sense organ that communicates constantly with your nervous system, is part of the mechanism through which that connection operates. Your psychological state influences your physical state, including your fascia. Your facial state influences your nervous system and thereby your psychological state. It's circular causation, each affecting the other continuously. When you feel stressed, you might notice your shoulders creeping up toward your ears, your jaw clenching, and your breath becoming shallow and held in your upper chest. These are fascial and muscular patterns, and they're directly connected to your emotional state. They prepare you for action, for fight or flight. The fascia in your shoulders and neck tenses to protect your head. Your jaw clenches in preparation for possible conflict. Your breathing shifts to prepare for exertion. Do them long enough and they become habitual, encoded in your nervous system as a default pattern. But they can also be changed through awareness and practice, learning to release chronic tension, to breathe more fully, to let your shoulders drop, and to unclench your jaw. These physical changes affect how you feel emotionally. It's not magic, it's physiology. The nervous system receives different information from your fascia and muscles when they're relaxed versus tense, and it interprets that information as part of determining your overall state. Release the physical tension, and the nervous system receives signals associated with safety rather than threat. Your emotional state shifts accordingly. There's a concept in some bodywork traditions called unwinding, where tissue is allowed to move spontaneously when restrictions are released, sometimes creating what looks like random movements or even bringing the body into positions that echo old injuries or traumas. A person might be lying on a table while a therapist holds their leg, and suddenly the leg starts to move on its own, rotating, flexing, and following some pattern that seems to have intelligence to it. Skeptics dismiss this as suggestion or placebo, and certainly those factors can play a role. But practitioners who regularly see this phenomenon believe there's something more happening. One possible explanation is that the fascial system, when given permission and safety, can reorganize itself in ways that release held patterns. The nervous system might be allowed to complete movement sequences that were interrupted during the original trauma. The fascia might be following lines of restriction back to their source, unwinding like a twisted rope being untwisted. The mechanism isn't fully understood, and more research is needed, but the phenomenon is widely reported by practitioners working with fascia across different traditions and approaches. Whether or not unwinding is real, in the way some practitioners claim, the larger point stands. Fascia is not just structural scaffolding, it's a living, responsive, sensory network that's deeply integrated with your nervous system and therefore with your experience of being in a body. Changes in fascia can affect how you feel, physically and emotionally, and how you feel can affect your fascia. This reciprocal relationship is something to be aware of and perhaps to work with intentionally. As we've journeyed through this network, from the bottom of the foot to the top of the head, from the surface to the depths, from the physical to the emotional, and from the cellular level to the whole body level, a picture has emerged of a body that is far more integrated and interconnected than the traditional anatomical model suggests. Fascia is the medium of that integration. It's not the only one. Your nervous system with its billions of neurons and trillions of connections, your circulatory system carrying blood to every cell, and your endocrine system sending hormonal messages throughout the body all contribute to making you a unified whole. But fascia might be the most overlooked of these integrating systems, and understanding it changes how we understand the body. There's a philosophical dimension to this worth considering. The reductionist approach that dominated Western science for centuries was based on the idea that to understand something complex, you break it into simpler parts and study those parts. This has been phenomenally successful. Almost everything we know about biology, chemistry, and physics comes from this approach. But it has limitations, and fascia reveals one of them. Some properties only emerge at the level of the whole system. You can study fascia in a petri dish, you can analyze its biochemistry, and you can map its structure. But the property of being a body-wide tensegrity network that integrates structure and function across multiple scales, that only exists at the level of the intact organism. This is called emergence in systems theory. The whole is more than the sum of its parts, not in a mystical sense, but in the sense that new properties emerge from the interactions and relationships between parts. Your body is not a pile of cells that happen to be adjacent. It's an organized system where relationships and connections create properties that don't exist at the level of individual components. Fascia is part of what creates those relationships and connections. Understanding this doesn't invalidate reductionist science. We still need detailed, careful study of parts and mechanisms, but it reminds us that we also need to study systems, relationships, and patterns. We need both approaches, zooming in to see details and zooming out to see wholes. Fascia research is increasingly taking this both and approach, using sophisticated molecular biology to understand how fibroblasts work, while also using systems thinking to understand how the fascial network functions as a whole. When you move, tomorrow you might find yourself more aware of the sense of connection between different parts of your body, the feeling of tissue sliding over tissue, and the continuity of movement from your center out to your periphery. That awareness itself can be valuable. When you pay attention to your body in movement, when you notice the quality of sensation and movement, you're providing feedback to your nervous system that helps it maintain and refine the fascial network. Awareness is not separate from physical health. It's part of how physical health is maintained. The nervous system uses information from the mechanoreceptors in fascia to update its internal model of your body, your sense of where you are in space, how you're oriented, and how you're moving. This process, called sensoromotor integration, is constantly happening below conscious awareness. But you can bring it into awareness intentionally, and doing so can enhance the process. This is part of what practices like yoga, Tai Chi, and various somatic disciplines do. They direct attention to sensation and movement in ways that refine the nervous system's body model and improve the quality of fascial organization. There's still so much we don't know about fascia. Research continues, accelerating in recent years as more scientists recognize the importance of this system. New discoveries are being made regularly. The full role of fascia in pain, in proprioception, in force transmission, in immune function, and in healing, all of these are active areas of investigation. We're learning about the signaling molecules that fascia produces, the way it communicates with the immune system, and the role it might play in conditions from chronic pain to cancer metastasis. In another decade, we'll understand far more than we do now, but already, the recognition of fascia's importance is changing practices across multiple fields. Physical therapists are incorporating fascial principles into their treatment approaches. Massage therapists are being trained in fascial techniques. Movement trainers are thinking about how to optimize fascial health alongside muscle strength and cardiovascular fitness. Even surgeons are beginning to think about how to preserve fascial integrity during procedures, recognizing that cutting through fascia isn't consequence-free. In the world of manual therapy, various schools of thought have developed around working with fascia. Rolfing, developed by Ida Rolf, uses deep, specific pressure to reorganize fascial patterns, often working systematically through the body in a series of sessions. Myofascial release, pioneered by John Barnes and others, uses sustained pressure and stretching to release fascial restrictions. Structural integration, a broader term that encompasses Rolfing and related approaches, aims to balance the fascial network so the body can function with less effort and more ease. Fascial stretch therapy combines stretching with traction and breathing to improve fascial mobility. Osteopathic and chiropractic approaches often incorporate fascial work alongside joint manipulation. Asian bodywork traditions like shiatsu and Thai massage, while developed within different conceptual frameworks, work with tissue in ways that affect fascia. These and other approaches share a recognition that fascia matters and can be influenced through skilled touch and movement. They differ in their techniques and philosophies, but they're all, in their own way, languages for speaking with the fascial network. Some work more aggressively, using significant pressure to create change. Others work more gently, using light touch and sustained holds. Some focus on local restrictions, finding and releasing specific tight spots. Others focus on global patterns, working with the long lines of fascial continuity through the body. There's probably wisdom in various approaches, depending on the individual, their tissues, their nervous system, and the nature of their restrictions. Not everyone responds to the same techniques in the same way. What's becoming clear from research and clinical practice is that working with fascia is partly about the mechanical effects on tissue and partly about effects on the nervous system. The mechanoreceptors in fascia respond to touch, pressure, and movement, sending signals that can alter pain perception, muscle tone, and proprioception. Sometimes the primary effect of fascial work isn't changing the tissue structure, though that can happen with sustained work over time, but changing the nervous system's relationship to the tissue. This is why manual therapy often needs to be combined with active movement and exercise to create lasting change. The therapist can release restrictions and improve tissue quality, but the client needs to then move in new ways to reinforce and consolidate those changes. The nervous system needs to learn new patterns, and learning requires repetition and practice. This is true whether we're talking about learning a language, a musical instrument, or new movement patterns. What's clear is that maintaining fascial health requires movement, varied and regular. It requires adequate hydration, which we've discussed. It benefits from occasional focused work, whether through self-care practices like foam rolling, stretching, and self-massage, or through skilled manual therapy when needed. It responds to attention and awareness, to bringing consciousness to sensation and movement. Like most aspects of health, it's not about perfection or intensive intervention. It's about consistent patient care over time. Your fascia is, right now, holding you in form. It's distributing the pressure of lying down across your body, preventing any one area from bearing too much load. It's sensing the position of your limbs, sending constant streams of information to your nervous system about where you are in space. It's maintaining the relationships between your organs, your muscles, and your bones, keeping everything in proper position even as you move and breathe. It's doing this work constantly, without your conscious attention, without any effort on your part, as it has been since before you were born. Before you had fully formed bones or fully developed muscles, you had fascia. In embryonic development, fascia appears early, creating the template for the developing body. The fascia forms first, and then bones and muscles develop within the fascial framework. In a very real sense, fascia is the foundational tissue, the matrix within which everything else is organized. This early appearance in development reflects its fundamental importance in creating and maintaining bodily organization. And it will continue this work, this holding, this connecting, this sensing for all of your life. It will adapt to how you use your body, reorganizing itself to support whatever you ask of it, whether that's sitting at a desk, running marathons, playing with grandchildren, or anything else. It will age as you age, but how it ages is partly within your influence through how you move, how you hydrate, and how you care for yourself. It's resilient, capable of healing and remodeling even after injury or years of restriction. It's regenerative, with fibroblasts constantly maintaining and renewing the network. It's responsive, adapting to the demands you place on it within the constraints of your genetics and age. It's the hidden web, now not quite so hidden, a network that makes you whole, that makes you embodied. that makes movement possible and sensation rich and structure stable. It's been there all along, beneath notice, doing its crucial work quietly. The anatomists scraped it away to get to what they thought was important. But it was important all along, perhaps as important as anything else in the body. It deserves recognition, appreciation, and care. As you drift towards sleep now, as your breathing naturally slows and deepens, as your muscles gradually relax and your body settles more fully into the surface beneath you, imagine for a moment that you can feel this network, this continuous web of tissue that is yours, that is you in a very real sense. Feel the way everything connects to everything else, the way your body is not a collection of parts but a unified field, held together by fascia's embrace. There's something comforting in that, isn't there? A sense of being held, supported, and integrated. You're not fragmented, you're not falling apart, you're whole, and the web maintains that wholeness. Even in sleep, even when you're not conscious of it, the fascia continues its work. It adapts to your sleeping position, maintains the relationships between structures, and senses any changes that might require a response. It's a faithful companion, this fascial system, always present, always working, and in that holding, in that continuity, there's a kind of wisdom. The body knows how to organize itself, how to heal itself, and how to maintain itself if given half a chance. Fascia is part of how that organizing intelligence operates, creating form, maintaining structure, allowing change, sensing the world, and connecting every part to every other part. It's responsive to your choices about movement, hydration, stress management, and rest. It's affected by injury, inflammation, surgery, and trauma, but it's also remarkably capable of adaptation and recovery. When fascia is injured, whether from trauma, surgery, or chronic stress, it goes through a healing process. Initially, there's inflammation, which is necessary for healing, but can become problematic if it persists too long. The fibroblasts ramp up collagen production, laying down new tissue to repair the damage. Initially, this new tissue is somewhat disorganized, not yet oriented to handle forces optimally. Over time, with appropriate mechanical loading from movement, the collagen gradually reorganizes, aligning with stress lines to restore function. But if movement is restricted during healing, either from immobilization or from pain-related guarding, the collagen can remain disorganized or can form adhesions where fascial layers stick together. This is why controlled progressive movement is usually recommended during recovery from injury. The movement provides the mechanical signals that guide proper healing and prevent problematic adhesion formation. The fascia needs to be loaded and stretched during healing to organize properly, but not so much that healing is disrupted. It's a balance, requiring patience and careful attention. Scar tissue itself is really just densely packed, somewhat disorganized fascia. When skin is cut and heals, the visible scar on the surface continues deep into the fascial layers beneath. Depending on where it is and how it heals, it can create pulling patterns in the fascial web that affect nearby or even distant structures. A surgical scar on the abdomen, for instance, can create restrictions that affect breathing, posture, or even hip mobility through the fascial connections. Some practitioners specialize in scar tissue work, using specific techniques to help restore mobility to scarred fascia. This might involve gentle stretching of the scar in various directions, myofascial release techniques, or manual manipulation to break up adhesions. Research suggests that these approaches can sometimes have dramatic effects on pain and function, particularly for older scars that have been causing problems for years. The scar tissue doesn't go away, but its relationship to surrounding tissue can be changed, restoring some mobility and reducing the pulling patterns that were causing dysfunction. Even something as common as a cesarean section scar can have widespread effects through fascial connections. The scar cuts through multiple layers of abdominal fascia, and as it heals, it can create restrictions that affect the pelvic floor, the diaphragm, the organs in the abdomen, and the musculoskeletal system. Women who have had cesarean sections sometimes experience chronic lower back pain, pelvic pain, or abdominal discomfort that's related to their scar, even years after the surgery. Working with the scar tissue and the fascial system around it can sometimes provide relief. This isn't to say that all problems are fascial or that fascial work is a panacea. Many conditions have complex multifactorial causes, but fascia is often part of the picture, and addressing it can be a valuable component of a comprehensive treatment approach. The body is too complex for single cause explanations or single intervention cures. Health and healing usually require multiple approaches working together, addressing fascia, the nervous system, muscles, joints, nutrition, stress, sleep, and all the other factors that influence well-being. Consider for a moment the implications of fascia for understanding pain, particularly chronic pain. Pain is a complex phenomenon, not simply a signal of tissue damage, but a construction of the nervous system based on multiple inputs. Fascia, with its dense sensory network, is one source of those inputs. When fascia is restricted, inflamed, or under excessive tension, it sends signals to the nervous system that can be interpreted as pain. But the relationship between fascial state and pain experience isn't simple or linear. Sometimes people have significant fascial restrictions visible on ultrasound or palpable to skilled hands, but they feel no pain. Other times, people have severe pain with no obvious tissue pathology. The pain experience is determined not just by what's happening in the tissues, but by how the nervous system processes and interprets those signals. Context matters, meaning matters, attention matters, stress and emotional state matter. All of these factors influence whether signals from fascia are interpreted as threatening pain or as benign sensation. This understanding has important implications for treatment. Effective pain management often needs to address both the tissues and the nervous system, both the peripheral signals and the central processing. Working with fascia can change the peripheral signals, reducing input that might be contributing to pain. But working with the nervous system, through pain education, stress management, movement, mindfulness, and other approaches, is often equally important. Pain is a biopsychosocial phenomenon influenced by biological, psychological, and social factors. Fascia is part of the biological component, but only part. There's also growing recognition that fascia might play a role in conditions beyond pain. Some researchers are investigating whether fascial health influences athletic performance, recovery from exercise, susceptibility to injury, and even metabolic health. The fascial system is so extensive and so intimately connected with other body systems that it seems likely to influence a wide range of functions. We're only beginning to understand the full scope of fascia's roles in health and disease. For instance, there's emerging research on fascia and the lymphatic system. Lymph, the clear fluid that circulates through the body collecting waste products and supporting immune function, moves partly through dedicated lymphatic vessels, but also through spaces in the fascia. The fascia acts as a highway system for lymph flow. When fascia is mobile and healthy, lymph flows well. When fascia is restricted, lymph flow can be impaired, potentially affecting immune function and tissue health. Some manual therapy techniques specifically aim to enhance lymphatic drainage through fascial work. There's also research on fascia and cancer metastasis, the spread of cancer from one site to others. Cancer cells often travel through fascial planes as they spread through the body. Understanding the fascial architecture might help understand metastasis patterns and could potentially inform surgical approaches to cancer treatment. Some surgeons are already thinking about fascial preservation during cancer surgery, removing the tumor while trying to maintain the integrity of surrounding fascial structures to reduce the likelihood of providing pathways for any remaining cancer cells to travel. The fascia might even play a role in the effects of acupuncture, though this remains somewhat controversial and more research is needed. Many acupuncture points correspond to locations where fascial planes meet or where nerves pierce through fascia. When an acupuncture needle is inserted and manipulated, it creates mechanical deformation. Retry CW continue of the fascia. The needle literally grabs the collagen fibers and tugs on them, creating tension that can extend several centimeters from the needle insertion point. This mechanical stimulus activates mechanoreceptors throughout the affected fascial area, potentially triggering nervous system responses that extend far beyond the local tissue. Studies using ultrasound imaging have shown that when an acupuncture needle is manipulated using the traditional technique of rotating it back and forth, the fascia winds around the needle like spaghetti around a fork. This creates a sustained mechanical signal that persists even after the needle manipulation stops. The fascia essentially holds onto the needle, maintaining tension. This might explain why acupuncture needles are often left in place for a period of time. The sustained fascial tension continues to stimulate mechanoreceptors throughout that time. This doesn't validate all of traditional Chinese medicine theory, or prove that energy meridians exist in a literal sense, but it does suggest that through centuries of empirical observation and refinement, acupuncture practitioners discovered something real about the body's architecture and how to interact with it mechanically. They developed a practical technology that works, even if their theoretical explanations for why it works were framed in terms of concepts like qi and meridians that don't correspond to anything we can measure with modern instruments. This kind of disconnect between practical effectiveness and theoretical explanation isn't unusual in the history of medicine. Many treatments worked long before we understood their mechanisms. Willow bark tea relieved pain and fever for centuries before we isolated salicylic acid and understood prostaglandin synthesis. The practice preceded the understanding. Acupuncture might be similar, a practice that works through fascial and nervous system mechanisms, even though it was developed within a different conceptual framework. Similarly, practices like yoga and Tai Chi, which involve sustained stretching, breathing and awareness, profoundly affect fascia, even though that's not how they're traditionally described. When you hold a yoga pose, you're not just stretching muscle, you're loading fascia, creating sustained tension that stimulates the fibroblasts to remodel the network. The sustained hold is important. It takes time for the viscoelastic properties of fascia to allow it to gradually lengthen. Quick bouncing stretches don't give fascia time to respond. Sustained holds of 30 seconds or more allow the tissue to gradually yield. You're also increasing hydration to the ground substance as fluid is squeezed and released, much like squeezing a sponge. When you stretch, fluid is pushed out of the compressed areas of tissue. When you release the stretch, fresh fluid flows back in, bringing nutrients and removing waste products. This pumping action is part of how stretching maintains tissue health. You're changing the neural signaling from the mechanoreceptors embedded throughout the fascial web, teaching your nervous system to tolerate more length and less protective tension. You're breathing in ways that create internal movement of visceral fascia, maintaining mobility of the organs and their fascial suspensions. It's a comprehensive fascial intervention, even if that's not how yoga is traditionally described or understood by most practitioners. The ancient yogis didn't know about fascia, collagen, or mechanoreceptors, but they developed practices through careful observation and experimentation that affect these systems beneficially. The practices work on fascia, whether or not that was the intended target, just as they work on many other systems simultaneously. The same could be said for practices like Tai Chi or Qigong, which involve slow, flowing movements and focused attention. These practices might be particularly beneficial for fascia because they emphasize the kind of whole-body integration and gentle, sustained loading that keeps the fascial network healthy. The movements are rarely isolated to one joint or one body part. They flow through the whole body, creating waves of tension and release through the fascial web. They're performed slowly enough that you can pay attention to the quality of sensation and movement, providing rich feedback to the nervous system. Fast, repetitive movements can certainly strengthen muscles and improve cardiovascular fitness, and those things matter enormously. But slower, varied movements might be better for maintaining fascial mobility and health. Your body needs both kinds of movement, really. Variety is key. The body adapts to the demands you place on it, so varied demands create more complete adaptation. If you only ever move fast, you miss the benefits of slow, sustained loading. If you only ever move slowly, you miss the benefits of elastic recoil and power development. One of the challenges in studying fascia scientifically is that it doesn't behave like most tissues we're used to studying. It's not neatly compartmentalized. You can't remove the fascia the way you can remove an organ for study. It's everywhere, interconnected, inseparable from the structures it surrounds. It changes its properties based on how it's loaded, how long it's loaded, its hydration state, temperature, and many other factors. It's viscoelastic, meaning it has properties of both viscous fluids and elastic solids, and which property dominates depends on the circumstances. Pull on fascia quickly, like a sudden stretch, and it resists stiffly, behaving like a solid. The collagen fibers don't have time to reorganize, the ground substance doesn't have time to flow, and the tissue resists deformation. This is protective. It helps prevent injury from sudden forces, but applies steady, sustained pressure, like holding a stretch or receiving sustained pressure from a therapist's hands, and fascia gradually yields and reorganizes, behaving more like a fluid. The collagen fibers can slip past each other, the ground substance can flow, and the tissue gradually lengthens or softens. This is why different manual therapy techniques work on different principles. Some use quick mobilizations or manipulations, taking advantage of the elastic, solid-like behavior of fascia to create rapid changes in tissue tension or joint position. Others use sustained holds, waiting for the tissue to gradually soften and release as its fluid-like properties emerge. Both approaches have value, and skilled practitioners often combine them, using different techniques for different situations and different tissues. Fascia also has the ability to contract independently of muscles, though more slowly and with less force. Specialized cells called myofibroblasts, which are like a hybrid between regular fibroblasts and muscle cells, can generate tension in the fascial network. They contain contractile proteins similar to those in smooth muscle, and they can respond to various chemical signals by contracting. This fascial contractility might play a role in chronic pain conditions where muscles seem to be in spasm even without nerve signals actively telling them to contract. The fascia itself might be maintaining tension, creating a kind of structural holding pattern that's hard to release through normal means. The myofibroblasts might be responding to inflammatory signals or stress hormones by contracting and maintaining that contraction. This could explain why some chronic pain doesn't respond well to muscle relaxants, or why some tension patterns persist even when someone is under anesthesia and their muscles are completely relaxed. The tension is in the fascia, not just the muscles. Understanding this opens new therapeutic possibilities. If fascial contractility contributes to chronic pain, then approaches that affect fascia, manual therapy, sustained stretching, heat, or even emerging pharmaceutical approaches that target myofibroblast activity might be helpful. Research in this area is ongoing, but it represents a shift in thinking from viewing chronic pain purely as a nervous system problem to understanding it as a problem involving the tissues themselves, including fascia. There's also fascinating research on how fascia responds to inflammation and injury at the cellular and molecular level. When tissue is injured, The inflammatory process that follows affects the fascia profoundly. The ground substance becomes more viscous as inflammatory molecules alter its composition. The fibroblasts start laying down new collagen, often in disorganized patterns, rather than the highly organized orientations of healthy fascia. The tissue becomes stiffer and less mobile. Adhesions can form where layers of fascia that should slide freely stick together. This is part of the healing process, and it's necessary to some degree. The body is stabilizing the injured area, creating a patch job to restore structural integrity. But if inflammation persists too long, or if movement is restricted during healing, the result can be lasting restrictions that affect function long after the initial injury has healed. The fascia remodels in a restricted pattern, and that becomes the new normal unless actively addressed. This is why movement and manual therapy are often recommended during recovery from injury, applied at appropriate times and intensities. The goal is to help guide the healing process toward restoration of normal function rather than just formation of restrictive scar tissue. Gentle movement during healing provides mechanical signals that help orient the new collagen in functional patterns. Manual therapy can help prevent or break up adhesions between fascial layers. The timing and intensity have to be carefully calibrated. Too much too soon can disrupt healing, and too little or too late can allow dysfunction to become established. Consider for a moment the implications of all this for healthcare and medicine. If fascia is as important as emerging research suggests, it should be given more attention in medical education, clinical practice, and research. Currently, most medical schools spend little time on fascia. It's mentioned briefly, if at all, as connective tissue that holds things together. The complex architecture, the sensory richness, the mechanical properties, the clinical significance, these typically aren't taught. Doctors graduate knowing little about a system that might be crucial for understanding pain, movement disorders, and various other conditions. This is starting to change. Some medical schools are incorporating more fascia education into their curricula. Some research institutions are establishing fascia research centers. International conferences on fascia bring together researchers from various disciplines to share findings. But it's a slow process, and mainstream medicine is generally conservative about incorporating new ideas. The old model of anatomy, where fascia was dismissed as packing material, is deeply entrenched. Physical therapy and manual therapy fields have been quicker to embrace fascial concepts, perhaps because practitioners in these fields work hands-on with tissue and can directly feel the properties and responses of fascia. When you put your hands on someone's body and feel the quality of tissue, sense where it's restricted and where it's mobile, and watch how it responds to different techniques, fascia's importance becomes obvious. The tactile feedback that hands-on practitioners receive gives them information that's hard to get from imaging studies or laboratory tests. This creates an interesting situation where some practitioners, working primarily from clinical experience and tactile feedback, have developed sophisticated understandings of fascia and effective treatment approaches, while research is still catching up to explain why these approaches work. There's a tension between experiential knowledge and scientific validation, between what works in practice and what can be proven in controlled studies. Ideally, these should inform each other. Clinical experience suggesting hypotheses for research, research findings refining clinical practice. The future of fascia research and clinical application is promising. Better imaging technologies are allowing us to see fascia in living bodies in ways we couldn't before. High-resolution ultrasound can visualize fascial layers and their movement. Elastography, which measures tissue stiffness, can detect fascial restrictions. MRI techniques are being refined to better image fascia. These technological advances are making fascia more accessible to scientific study, which should accelerate our understanding. There's also growing interest in developing pharmaceutical approaches that target fascia. If myofibroblast contractility contributes to chronic pain, can we develop drugs that modulate that contractility? If fascial adhesions form because of specific molecular signals during healing, can we interfere with those signals to prevent problematic adhesion formation? These are questions being explored in laboratories around the world. The answers could lead to new treatment options for conditions that currently have limited effective treatments. But technology and pharmaceuticals aren't the only answers. Many of the best interventions for facial health are simple, accessible, and essentially free. Movement, varied and regular. Adequate hydration. Attention to posture and breathing. Periodic stretching. Self-massage with simple tools. These don't require expensive equipment or prescription medications. They require information, motivation, and consistent practice. They require taking responsibility for one's own health and well-being, which is perhaps harder than taking a pill, but ultimately more empowering. As you lie here now, your body is a living testament to the complexity and beauty of human biology. Your fascia is doing its work silently, maintaining your form, sensing your position, distributing forces, and connecting everything to everything else. It's been adapting to your life, your habits, your movements, and your history. Every injury, every period of sitting still, and every activity you've pursued has left its mark on your fascial network, for better or worse. But fascia is also responsive to change. It can adapt, remodel, and heal. The patterns established over years can be shifted with patient, consistent work. This isn't about achieving perfection or eliminating all restrictions. Some degree of asymmetry and restriction is normal, perhaps even inevitable. You've lived a life, and life leaves marks. The goal is not to erase your history, but to maintain enough mobility, enough adaptability, and enough resilience to keep moving through life with reasonable comfort and function. The goal is to support your fascia in its work of holding you together, helping it rather than hindering it. And this support comes through simple things, moving in varied ways, not getting locked into repetitive patterns. Drinking enough water, breathing fully, periodically stretching, not aggressively, but sustainably, with awareness. Seek skilled help when needed, whether from physical therapists, massage therapists, movement teachers, or others who understand fascia and can help you work with yours. Paying attention to your body's signals, noticing where you feel mobile and where you feel restricted, where you feel ease and where you feel tension. This kind of embodied awareness is something that modern life often doesn't encourage. We spend so much time in our heads, focused on screens, living in abstract realms of language and symbol. We can go hours or even days barely noticing our bodies, except when they demand attention through discomfort or pain. But the body is always there, always experiencing, always sensing. The fascia is always sending information to your nervous system about your physical state. Learning to tune into that information, to listen to your body, is a skill that can be developed. You don't need to become obsessed with your body or hypervigilant about sensation, but cultivating a friendly awareness, a sense of curiosity about your physical experience, can be valuable. How does your shoulder feel right now? Can you sense the quality of tissue there? Is it tense or relaxed, mobile or held? What about your jaw, your belly and your feet? Just noticing, without judgment, without needing to fix or change anything. Just being aware of your embodied existence. This awareness itself can be therapeutic. The nervous system responds to attention. When you bring awareness to an area of your body, you're literally sending more neural activity to the representation of that area in your brain. You're strengthening the neural pathways associated with sensing that area. Over time, this can improve proprioception, refine motor control, and even reduce pain. Attention is not passive. It changes what it observes. There's a practice in some somatic traditions called body scanning, where you systematically move your attention through your body, noticing sensations in each area without trying to change anything, just noticing. This simple practice has been shown to have measurable effects on pain, stress, and body awareness. It costs nothing, requires no equipment, and can be done anywhere. It's just attention, systematically applied to your physical experience, and it works, at least partially, through its effects on your relationship with your fascia and the sensory information constantly flowing from it. As sleep approaches, your fascia will continue its work through the night. As you move through different sleep stages, as you shift positions occasionally, and as your breathing slows and deepens in deep sleep or becomes more rapid and irregular during dreams, your fascia adapts moment by moment. It maintains your form even as you lose consciousness. It keeps everything in relationship even as your awareness dissolves into sleep. It's faithful and constant. And tomorrow, when you wake, when you begin to move again, your fascia will respond. It will need a few minutes to transition from its nighttime state to its daytime readiness, rehydrating, mobilizing, and adjusting to movement and gravity's full demands. Give it that time. Be gentle with yourself in those first movements of the day. Stretch a little, breathe, and allow your body to wake gradually. Your fascia will appreciate it, and you'll feel better for it. Through the day tomorrow, remember occasionally that you're not just a collection of separate parts. You're a unified field, a continuous whole, held together by this remarkable network we've explored tonight. When you reach for something, a wave of tension travels through your fascia, from your center out to your hand. When you walk, elastic energy is stored and released in the fascia of your feet and legs with every step. When you breathe, your visceral fascia moves, massaging your organs and supporting your health in ways you don't even notice. You are a social being, not just a muscular or skeletal or nervous being, though you're all of those too. But fascia is fundamental, possibly the most fundamental tissue in creating your embodied existence. It's the container and the contained, the structure and what structures support, and the sensor and part of what's sensed. It's paradoxical in that way, serving multiple roles simultaneously, but then you are paradoxical, a unified whole made of countless parts, a physical body with subjective experience, a pattern that persists even as the material components constantly turn over. Your fascia now is not the same fascia you had a year ago, not at the molecular level. The collagen has been broken down and resynthesized. The fibroblasts have divided and died and been replaced, and the ground substance has been renewed countless times. Yet the pattern persists. The organization remains, and the network continues its work. You are more of a process than a thing, a dynamic pattern in constant exchange with your environment, and fascia is central to maintaining that pattern's coherence. Rest now in the knowledge that you're held, supported, and integrated by this living web. Let your muscles relax fully, knowing that even relaxed, your fascia maintains your form. Let your breathing slow and deepen, feeling perhaps the movement of your diaphragm, the gentle mobilization of your visceral fascia with each breath. Let your awareness diffuse and soften, allowing sleep to come when it's ready, trusting that your fascia will continue its work through the night, holding you together in ways both structural and profound. The hidden web is hidden no longer, at least, not from you. It's part of your awareness now, part of how you understand yourself. And that understanding, that knowledge of connection and integration, might just make you more gentle with yourself, more patient with your body's limitations, more appreciative of its capabilities, and more curious about your physical experience. You're a marvel of interconnection, a walking, breathing example of emergent complexity, and fascia is the thread that weaves the marvel together. Sleep well in that knowledge. The web holds you still, has always held you, and will hold you through all your days. It asks little in return, just movement, hydration, occasional attention, and patient care. Small investments that pay dividends in comfort, function, and resilience. Your fascia has been your faithful companion since before birth, adapting to your life, supporting your existence, and connecting you to yourself. Honor it, care for it, and it will serve you well for all your life. The story of fascia is still being written. New chapters are being added by researchers and practitioners around the world. But tonight's story, this journey through the hidden web, can end here, with you drifting towards sleep, held in fascia's embrace, integrated and whole. Rest well. Tomorrow brings new opportunities to move, to sense, and to live fully in your marvelously connected body. But for now, just rest. The web holds you. All is well. Tonight, we're going to talk about the human heart, but not in the way you might expect. We're not going to focus on poetry or romance, on metaphors about love or courage. Instead, we're going to do something perhaps even more remarkable. We're going to look at the heart as what it truly is, a pump. A tireless, elegant, surprisingly humble organ that has been beating inside you without any conscious effort on your part, somewhere between 60 and 100 times per minute. Every minute, of every hour, of every day, of your entire life. Now, let's begin at the very beginning. Let's start with the simple, almost boring truth about what your heart actually is. Your heart is a muscle. That's it, really. It's about the size of your closed fist, a bit larger if you're tall, a bit smaller if you're petite, and it weighs somewhere between 8 and 12 ounces. Less than a can of soup. It sits slightly left of center in your chest, tucked between your lungs, behind your sternum, in a space called the mediastinum. If you were to open a medical textbook and look at a diagram, you'd see it drawn with remarkable precision. 4 chambers, various vessels sprouting from the top like plumbing fixtures, and a neat cross-section showing walls of varying thickness. But here's what those diagrams never quite capture. Your heart is soft, warmer than you'd think, dark red, almost purple in places, and it moves. Not just the rhythmic contracting and relaxing that we call a heartbeat, but a kind of writhing, twisting motion as it works. It's perpetually slick with a thin layer of fluid, housed in a protective sac called the pericardium, which keeps it from rubbing against your other organs as it does its endless work. Let me tell you what I find most remarkable about the heart, and it's something that won't sound remarkable at all at first. The heart is boring. Beautifully, elegantly, almost magnificently boring. It does the same thing over and over and over again. Contract, relax, fill, squeeze, receive, expel. It's been doing this since you were an embryo the size of a poppy seed, and it will continue doing this until the very last moment of your life. No vacation days, no lunch breaks, no weekends off. Right now, as you're listening to this, your heart is beating. You probably weren't thinking about it until I mentioned it, were you? That's the genius of it. This organ that is literally keeping you alive operates almost entirely outside your conscious awareness. You can't decide to stop your heart, not really. You can hold your breath, but your heart will keep beating. You can lie perfectly still, but your heart carries on. Even when you sleep, especially when you sleep, your heart is there, working in the darkness, moving blood through 96,000 kilometers of vessels, reaching every cell in your body. Let's talk about the structure, because understanding how something is built helps us understand how it works. The heart has 4 chambers, but it's easier to think of it as 2 pumps side by side, each with 2 rooms. On the right side, you have the right atrium and the right ventricle. On the left side, the left atrium and the left ventricle. These two sides are separated by a wall called the septum, and under normal circumstances, blood never crosses from one side to the other. The right side of your heart is the side that deals with what we call deoxygenated blood. This is blood that has travelled through your body, delivered its oxygen to your tissues, and returned carrying carbon dioxide and other waste products. It's darker in colour, that deep burgundy red you see in medical shows. This blood arrives at the right atrium from two large veins, the superior vena cava, which brings blood from your upper body, and the inferior vena cava, which brings blood from your lower body. The right atrium is a receiving chamber. It's not particularly muscular. Its walls are thin, only about 2 millimeters thick, because it doesn't need to generate much pressure. It simply needs to collect the returning blood and pass it along to the right ventricle below it. Between these two chambers sits a valve, the tricuspid valve, so named because it has 3 cusps, or flaps. This valve opens when the atrium contracts, allowing blood to flow down into the ventricle, and then closes to prevent blood from washing back up. Now, the right ventricle is where things get more interesting. It's considerably more muscular than the atrium, with walls about 3 to 5 millimeters thick. Its job is to pump that deoxygenated blood out of the heart and into the lungs, where it will release carbon dioxide and pick up fresh oxygen. This journey to the lungs is relatively short, maybe 20 to 30 centimeters at most, so the right ventricle doesn't need to generate enormous pressure, just enough to push the blood through the pulmonary arteries and into the vast network of capillaries that surround your lungs' air sacs. The left side of your heart is where the real heavy lifting happens. After blood has been refreshed in the lungs, it returns to the heart through the pulmonary veins, usually 4 of them, and enters the left atrium. Again, this is a thin-walled receiving chamber collecting the bright red, oxygen-rich blood and preparing to pass it along. Between the left atrium and left ventricle sits another valve, the mitral valve, which has 2 cusps instead of 3. Sometimes called the bicuspid valve, it opens and closes with the same purpose. Forward flow only, no backwash. The left ventricle is the powerhouse. Its walls are thick, 10 to 15 millimeters of solid cardiac muscle, because this chamber has an enormous job. It needs to generate enough pressure to send blood to every part of your body, from the top of your head to the tips of your toes, up against gravity to your brain, down the length of your legs, through your kidneys, your liver, and your intestines, out to your skin, your bones, your fingernails, everywhere. When the left ventricle contracts, blood is forced out through the aortic valve and into the aorta, the largest artery in your body. The aorta arches up and over like a candy cane, then descends down through your chest and abdomen, branching again and again into smaller and smaller vessels until the blood reaches the microscopic capillaries where actual exchange happens. Oxygen and nutrients out, carbon dioxide and waste products in. And then the whole cycle begins again. The blood, now deoxygenated, makes its way back through progressively larger veins until it reaches the right atrium, ready for another lap. This happens about 70 times per minute when you're at rest, more when you're active. If you live to be 80 years old, your heart will have beaten approximately 3 billion times. 3 billion cycles of filling and squeezing, receiving and expelling. It's almost absurd when you think about it. Let's talk about the valves for a moment, because they're easy to overlook but absolutely essential. Your heart has 4 valves, the tricuspid, pulmonary, mitral, and aortic, and each one is a small masterpiece of engineering. They're made of thin, flexible tissue covered in endothelium, the same smooth lining that covers the inside of your blood vessels. When they're working properly, they're completely silent. You never hear them. You never feel them, but they're not passive. Each valve is connected to small muscular cords called chordae tendineae, literally heartstrings in Latin, which attach to papillary muscles in the ventricle walls. When the ventricles contract, these papillary muscles contract too, pulling on the chordae tendineae to prevent the valves from flipping backward like an umbrella in the wind. It's a beautifully choreographed movement, all happening in a fraction of a second. When valves malfunction, you hear it. A heart murmur is usually the sound of turbulent blood flow caused by a valve that doesn't close completely or doesn't open fully. Sometimes these murmurs are harmless, just small quirks in the plumbing. Other times they indicate problems that need attention. But the valve itself makes no sound when it's working correctly. Only when something goes wrong does it announce its presence. Now let's talk about what the heart is made of, because this is where things become genuinely fascinating. The heart wall has 3 layers. The outermost layer, the epicardium, is thin and delicate, essentially the inner layer of the pericardial sac. The middle layer, the myocardium, is where the muscle lives. Thick, strong, striated, cardiac muscle cells that are unlike any other muscle in your body. And the innermost layer, the endocardium, is that smooth endothelial lining I mentioned, creating a slick surface for blood to flow across. Cardiac muscle is strange and wonderful. Under a microscope, it looks somewhat like skeletal muscle, the kind in your arms and legs, with those same striations, those parallel bands of protein filaments that slide past each other to create contraction. But cardiac muscle cells are branched and interconnected in ways that skeletal muscle cells are not. They link together through structures called intercalated discs, which contain gap junctions, tiny channels that allow electrical signals to pass directly from one cell to another. This matters enormously. It means that cardiac muscle doesn't need to be told to contract by the nervous system the way your biceps does. Instead, cardiac muscle is inherently rhythmic. It generates its own electrical impulses, passes them from cell to cell through those gap junctions, and contracts as a coordinated unit. Your heart would beat even if you severed every nerve connecting it to your brain. In fact, if you removed a heart from a body and kept it supplied with oxygen and nutrients, it would continue beating on its own for a while. That's both remarkable and slightly unsettling. The heart's electrical system is governed by a small cluster of cells in the right atrium called the sinoatrial node, or SA node. This is your heart's natural pacemaker. About 70 times per minute, give or take, the SA node generates an electrical impulse that spreads across both atria, causing them to contract and squeeze blood into the ventricles. The impulse then reaches another cluster of cells called the atrioventricular node, or AV node, which sits between the atria and ventricles. The AV node does something clever. It delays the signal just briefly, about 1/10 of a second, giving the atria time to finish contracting before the ventricles get started. Then it passes the signal down through specialized conducting fibers called the bundle of His, which splits into left and right bundle branches, which further divide into Purkinje fibers that spread throughout the ventricle walls. The result is that both ventricles contract almost simultaneously, from the bottom up, squeezing blood efficiently toward the exit valves. This electrical activity is what an electrocardiogram, or ECG, measures. Those familiar squiggly lines you see on medical shows represent the depolarization and repolarization of different parts of the heart. The P wave is atrial contraction. The QRS complex is ventricular contraction. The T wave is ventricular relaxation, getting ready for the next cycle. It's electrical poetry written by your heart, over and over, all day and all night. But here's something that might surprise you. The heart doesn't rely solely on its own power. It gets help from the blood vessels themselves. When blood is ejected from the left ventricle into the aorta, that large elastic artery stretches to accommodate the sudden volume. Then during diastole, the relaxation phase, the aorta recoils, like a spring releasing, which helps maintain blood pressure and keeps blood flowing smoothly even between heartbeats. This is called the Wind-Kessel effect, and it's one of the reasons why arterial stiffness, which increases with age, is such a concern. When arteries lose their elasticity, the heart has to work harder. Let's talk about blood flow through the heart in more detail, because this is where the elegance of the design becomes apparent. Blood enters the right atrium under very low pressure. The venous system is a low pressure system. By the time blood has travelled through all those capillaries and back through the veins, most of the pressure generated by the heart has dissipated. The blood sort of pools in the right atrium, waiting. When the atrium contracts, it gives the blood a gentle squeeze, topping off the right ventricle, which has already been filling passively. Then the right ventricle contracts, the tricuspid valve snaps shut, the pulmonary valve opens, and blood is pushed into the pulmonary arteries. These arteries branch and branch, following the airways in the lungs until they become capillaries so narrow that red blood cells have to pass through single file. In the lungs, the capillaries wrap around tiny air sacs called alveoli. The walls of these capillaries are incredibly thin, just one cell thick, and oxygen diffuses across from the air you've breathed in, binding to hemoglobin in your red blood cells. At the same time, carbon dioxide diffuses in the opposite direction, from blood to air, ready to be exhaled. This exchange happens continuously, breath after breath, heartbeat after heartbeat. The refreshed blood then flows into the pulmonary veins, one of the few places in the body where veins carry oxygenated blood, and returns to the left atrium. The left atrium contracts, the mitral valve opens, and the left ventricle fills. Then comes the main event. The left ventricle contracts, the mitral valve closes, the aortic valve opens, and blood is launched into the aorta with enough force to create a palpable pulse that you can feel in your wrist, your neck, your groin, or anywhere an artery runs close to the surface. The amount of blood your heart pumps is staggering. At rest, about 5 litres per minute. That's your entire blood volume circulating through your heart every minute. During exercise, this can increase to 25 or even 30 litres per minute in a well-trained athlete. Your heart is pumping more than 6,000 litres of blood every day. Over a year, that's more than 2 million litres. Over a lifetime, we're talking about hundreds of millions of litres, all moved by this fist-sized muscle without you ever having to think about it. The heart needs its own blood supply, of course. It would be rather useless to pump blood everywhere else, but starve itself. This is where the coronary arteries come in. The right and left coronary arteries branch off from the aorta just above the aortic valve, and they wrap around the surface of the heart like a crown, hence coronary, delivering oxygen-rich blood to the cardiac muscle itself. These coronary arteries are small but critical. The left main coronary artery splits into 2 major branches. The left anterior, descending artery, which runs down the front of the heart, and the circumflex artery, which wraps around to the back. The right coronary artery supplies the right side of the heart, and, in most people, the bottom portion of the left ventricle as well. When these arteries become blocked by atherosclerotic plaques, blood clots, or spasms, the result is a heart attack or myocardial infarction. Portions of the heart muscle, starved of oxygen, begin to die. The heart is one of the few organs that doesn't regenerate well after injury. Your liver can regrow, your skin heals, even your bones can mend, but cardiac muscle has very limited regenerative capacity. When heart muscle dies, it's typically replaced by scar tissue. tough, fibrous material that doesn't contract. This is why heart attacks are so serious and why prevention, through managing blood pressure, cholesterol, and other risk factors, is so important. Let me tell you something about the heart's metabolism, because it's quietly extraordinary. The heart is an endurance athlete. It never sprints. It never rests. It maintains a steady aerobic pace for your entire life. To do this, it burns an enormous amount of energy. The heart consumes more oxygen per gram of tissue than almost any other organ in your body. It's metabolically expensive. Cardiac muscle cells are packed with mitochondria, those tiny cellular power plants that convert nutrients into usable energy. In fact, mitochondria make up about a third of the volume of a cardiac muscle cell. Compare that to skeletal muscle, where mitochondria might be just a few percent. This is because the heart can't afford to build up lactic acid and fatigue the way your legs do after a long run. It needs to keep functioning efficiently and continuously. The heart is also remarkably adaptable. When you exercise regularly, your heart becomes more efficient. It enlarges slightly, a phenomenon called athletic heart syndrome, which is completely normal and healthy. The left ventricle wall thickens, the chambers expand, and the heart stroke volume increases. This means it can pump more blood with each beat, so it doesn't need to beat as frequently. This is why trained athletes often have resting heart rates in the 50s or even 40s. Their hearts are simply more efficient machines. Conversely, certain diseases can cause unhealthy enlargement. When blood pressure is chronically high, the left ventricle has to work harder to push blood into the aorta. Over time, the muscle thickens, a process called hypertrophy, but not in a good way. The ventricle becomes stiffer, less compliant, and eventually less effective at pumping. The heart is adapting to the demand placed on it, but the adaptation becomes maladaptive. Let's take a moment to think about the heart's position in your body, because this is something we rarely consider. Your heart is behind your sternum, angled and rotated so that it points slightly forward and to the left. This is why we typically feel our heartbeat on the left side of our chest, and why the apex of the heart, the bottom point, taps against the inside of the chest wall with each beat. This tap is called the apical impulse, and doctors can sometimes feel it by pressing gently on the chest. The heart is surrounded by the lungs on either side, which provide cushioning. Below it sits the diaphragm, that dome-shaped muscle responsible for breathing. When you breathe in deeply, the diaphragm contracts and flattens, pushing down on the abdominal organs and creating more space in the chest cavity. This changes the pressure around the heart slightly, which is why your heart rate tends to increase a bit when you inhale and decrease when you exhale. It's a subtle effect, but it's there. The pericardium, that protective sac I mentioned earlier, has two layers, an outer fibrous layer and an inner serous layer. Between these layers is a thin space containing a few milliliters of lubricating fluid. This allows the heart to beat smoothly without friction. When this space becomes inflamed, a condition called pericarditis, the inflammation can cause sharp chest pain that worsens with breathing or lying down. And if too much fluid accumulates in this space, something called pericardial effusion, it can compress the heart and interfere with its ability to fill properly, a dangerous situation called cardiac tamponade. The anatomy of the heart is deeply interconnected with the rest of the cardiovascular system. Your arteries, branching from the aorta, become progressively smaller. Arteries to arterioles to capillaries. At the capillary level, the vessels are so narrow and the walls so thin that individual molecules can pass through. Oxygen and glucose diffuse out to cells. Carbon dioxide and metabolic waste products diffuse in. Then the blood begins its return journey. Capillaries merge into venules, venules into veins, and veins into larger veins until everything converges back at the right atrium. Veins are different from arteries in important ways. They have thinner walls because they operate under much lower pressure, and many veins, especially in the legs, contain one-way valves to prevent blood from flowing backward. This is crucial when you're standing upright. Gravity wants to pull blood down toward your feet, but those venous valves ensure it keeps moving upward back toward the heart. When you walk, the contraction of your leg muscles squeezes the veins, helping to push blood along, a mechanism sometimes called the skeletal muscle pump. The heart, for all its importance, is surprisingly humble in its presentation. It doesn't announce itself the way the brain does, with thoughts and personality. It doesn't make itself known the way the stomach does when you're hungry, or the bladder does when it's full. Most of the time, you're utterly unaware of your heart. It works in silence, in the background, a tireless servant that never complains, never protests, and never asks for recognition, unless something goes wrong. That's when the heart finally speaks up. Chest pain, shortness of breath, palpitations and fatigue. These are the heart's limited vocabulary, its ways of signaling that something isn't right. And because the heart is so critical, these signals are designed to get your attention quickly. Pain radiating down the left arm or up into the jaw, a crushing sensation in the chest, sudden breathlessness. These symptoms exist because they're effective at making us stop and seek help. Heart attacks are dramatic, but most heart disease develops slowly, over years or decades. Atherosclerosis, the buildup of cholesterol and other substances in artery walls, begins in childhood. By middle age, many people have significant plaque deposits in their coronary arteries without knowing it. The heart compensates remarkably well, often maintaining normal function even when blood flow is partially restricted. It's only when a plaque ruptures or a clot forms that the situation becomes acute. This is where understanding the heart's anatomy becomes personal. When doctors talk about a blockage in the LAD, the left anterior descending artery, they're talking about one of the most critical branches of the coronary system. The LAD supplies a large portion of the left ventricle, including the septum. A blockage here can be catastrophic, which is why the LAD is sometimes grimly nicknamed the Widowmaker. But here's something hopeful. The heart can be helped. Bypass surgery reroutes blood flow around a blockage using grafts from other blood vessels. Stents can be placed to hold open a narrowed artery. Medications can reduce the heart's workload, lower blood pressure, or prevent clots from forming. And lifestyle changes, diet, exercise, and stress management can dramatically reduce the risk of heart disease. The heart responds to how we treat it. Let's talk about the heart's size for a moment, because this is more variable than you might think. On average, an adult heart weighs about 250 to 350 grams. But heart size is influenced by body size, sex, and conditioning. Larger people tend to have larger hearts. Men typically have larger hearts than women, even after accounting for body size. And as I mentioned, athletes develop larger hearts through training. But there's a limit. A heart can become too large, too thick, or too stiff. In hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, the heart muscle thickens abnormally, sometimes to the point where it obstructs blood flow out of the left ventricle. In dilated cardiomyopathy, the chambers enlarge and the walls thin, reducing the heart's pumping efficiency. These conditions can be genetic, or they can develop in response to other diseases, alcohol abuse, or certain medications. The heart's rhythm is also more complex than a simple metronome. While the SA node sets the baseline pace, your heart rate is constantly being adjusted by the autonomic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system, your fight or flight mode, speeds the heart up and makes it contract more forcefully. The parasympathetic nervous system, your rest and digest mode, slows the heart down and gentles its contractions. This is why your heart rate increases when you're stressed or scared. It's why caffeine makes your heart race. It's why deep breathing and meditation can slow your heart rate. The heart is responsive, continuously adjusting to the demands and conditions of your body and mind. Interestingly, not all heartbeats originate from the SA node. Sometimes other clusters of cells in the atria or even the ventricles can generate their own electrical impulses. These are called ectopic beats, and they're usually harmless. You might feel them as a flutter or a skipped beat, that brief, strange sensation in your chest that makes you pause. Most people experience these occasionally. They're the heart's equivalent of a hiccup. But sometimes abnormal rhythms can be more serious. Atrial fibrillation, for instance, is a condition where the atria quiver chaotically instead of contracting smoothly. The electrical signals become disorganized, firing randomly from multiple locations. The ventricles try to keep up, but the result is an irregular, often rapid heartbeat. Blood doesn't flow efficiently out of the atria, which can lead to clot formation and increased risk of stroke. This is why atrial fibrillation is treated seriously, often with blood thinners and medications to control heart rate or restore normal rhythm. Ventricular arrhythmias are even more concerning. Ventricular tachycardia, a rapid rhythm originating in the ventricles, can quickly deteriorate into ventricular fibrillation, where the ventricles quiver uselessly instead of pumping. This is cardiac arrest. The heart is still showing electrical activity, but it's not moving blood. Without immediate intervention, CPR and defibrillation, death follows within minutes. Defibrillators work by delivering a large electrical shock to the heart, essentially resetting the electrical system. It's not about restarting the heart as movies often depict, but about stopping the chaotic, ineffective rhythm so the SA node can reassert control and restore normal coordinated contractions. Let's consider what the heart looks like across the lifespan. In a fetus, the heart begins beating around 3 weeks after conception, long before it has fully formed. At first, it's just a simple tube that twists and folds, gradually developing into the 4-chambered structure we recognize. Fetal circulation is different too. The lungs aren't yet functioning, so blood bypasses them through special shunts that close shortly after birth. When a baby is born and takes that first breath, enormous changes happen rapidly. The pressure in the chest shifts, the lungs inflate, and blood begins flowing through the pulmonary circulation for the first time. The shunts close. Within hours, the newborn circulation has completely reorganized itself. It's one of the most dramatic physiological transitions we ever undergo. As we age, the heart changes. It becomes slightly stiffer. The valves can calcify and thicken. The coronary arteries may narrow. The SA node loses some of its pacemaker cells, which is why maximum heart rate decreases with age. But a healthy heart can function remarkably well into old age. Centenarians have hearts that have beaten 3.5 billion times or more. That's an extraordinary testament to the organ's durability. There's something profound about the heart's constancy. It doesn't know about your worries, your ambitions, or your plans for tomorrow. It doesn't care if you're asleep or awake, happy or sad, young or old. It simply beats. Filling and squeezing, receiving and expelling, moving blood through your body with mechanical persistence. And yet, despite its mechanical nature, the heart is deeply connected to our emotions and our sense of self. We've always known this, haven't we? We feel our hearts race when we're anxious. We feel them flutter when we're in love. We feel them pound when we're afraid. These aren't just metaphors. They're real physiological responses. The brain and the heart are in constant communication, and emotional states genuinely affect heart function. Stress, for instance, triggers the release of hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, which increase heart rate and blood pressure. Chronic stress keeps the heart working harder than it needs to, contributing to wear and tear. Conversely, positive emotions, joy, contentment, and connection seem to have protective effects. There's growing evidence that social isolation and loneliness are risk factors for heart disease, while strong relationships and community involvement are protective. The heart is also remarkably sensitive to the rest of the body's health. Diabetes damages blood vessels, including the coronary arteries. Kidney disease affects blood pressure and fluid balance, putting strain on the heart. Thyroid disorders can make the heart race or slow down. Inflammatory conditions can affect the pericardium or the heart valves. The heart doesn't exist in isolation. It's part of an interconnected system, and disturbances elsewhere inevitably affect cardiac function. I find it fascinating that the heart generates its own magnetic field, measurable several feet away from the body. It's the strongest electromagnetic field produced by any organ. This field changes with each heartbeat, and some research suggests it may carry information about emotional states. Whether or not that's true, there's something poetic about the idea that our hearts broadcast their rhythms into the space around us. The heart's electrical system can be influenced externally too. Strong magnetic fields, certain toxins, and electrolyte imbalances, all of these can disrupt normal cardiac rhythms. Potassium and calcium levels, in particular, are critical. Too much or too little of either ion can cause dangerous arrhythmias. This is why people with kidney disease, which affects electrolyte balance, need to be monitored carefully. Let me tell you about heart sounds, because this is an aspect of cardiac anatomy that's often overlooked. When a doctor listens to your heart with a stethoscope, they're listening for two main sounds, lub and dub. The first sound, S1 or lub, is caused by the closing of the mitral and tricuspid valves at the start of ventricular contraction. The second sound, S2 or dub, is caused by the closing of the aortic and pulmonary valves at the start of ventricular relaxation. These sounds aren't the heart muscle contracting, they're the valves slamming shut. When valves leak or become narrowed, additional sounds, murmurs, can be heard. Skilled cardiologists can identify specific valve problems just by listening, determining not only which valve is affected, but also whether the problem is stenosis narrowing or regurgitation leaking. There are also sometimes third and fourth heart sounds, S3 and S4, which are lower pitched and heard in certain conditions. An S3 can be normal in young people, but may indicate heart failure in older adults. An S4 is never normal and suggests that the atria are having to contract more forcefully to fill a stiff ventricle. The heart's position and orientation in the chest mean that it produces different sounds depending on where the stethoscope is placed. The mitral valve is best heard at the apex on the left side of the chest. The aortic valve is best heard in the second right intercostal space, near the sternum. Each valve has its optimal listening location, and doctors are trained to move the stethoscope systematically across the chest. Now let's think about cardiac output, the total amount of blood the heart pumps per minute. This is calculated by multiplying stroke volume, the amount of blood ejected with each beat, by heart rate. A typical resting cardiac output is about 5 litres per minute, but this can be increased by either making each beat stronger, increasing stroke volume, or by increasing the heart rate volume, or by beating faster, increasing heart rate, or both. The heart's ability to increase cardiac output during exercise is called cardiac reserve. Young, healthy hearts have tremendous reserve. They can increase output 5 or 6 times above resting levels. But as we age, or if heart disease develops, cardiac reserve diminishes. The heart struggles to meet increased demands. This is why heart failure patients become short of breath with minimal exertion. Their hearts simply can't increase output enough to supply the muscles with adequate oxygen. Heart failure is a clinical syndrome, not a single disease. It occurs when the heart can't pump efficiently enough to meet the body's needs. This can happen because the heart muscle is weak, systolic dysfunction, because the heart is too stiff to fill properly, diastolic dysfunction, or because of valve problems, rhythm problems, or other structural issues. Fluid backs up into the lungs, causing shortness of breath. It pools in the legs, causing swelling. The kidneys struggle to function properly, leading to further fluid retention. Despite its name, heart failure doesn't mean the heart has stopped. It means the heart is failing to keep up with demand. And while it's a serious condition, it can often be managed with medications, lifestyle changes, and sometimes devices like pacemakers or implantable defibrillators. Let's talk about the heart's relationship with exercise, because this is where the organ's adaptability really shines. When you start exercising, several things happen almost immediately. Your muscles need more oxygen, so your heart rate increases. Your blood vessels dilate to allow more blood flow. Your breathing rate increases to bring more oxygen into your lungs. The sympathetic nervous system orchestrates this response. Within seconds of beginning exercise, your heart rate begins to climb. Blood is redistributed too. Blood flow to your digestive system decreases. Blood flow to your muscles increases dramatically. The heart doesn't pump harder to everywhere equally. The body intelligently directs blood where it's needed most. Over time, regular exercise remodels the heart in beneficial ways. The left ventricle enlarges and its walls thicken slightly, but the chamber remains compliant. The heart becomes more efficient at filling during diastole and emptying during systole. Stroke volume increases so the heart doesn't need to beat as fast to deliver the same amount of blood. This is profoundly important for health. Exercise is one of the best things you can do for your heart. It improves endothelial function, reduces blood pressure, helps control weight, improves lipid profiles, reduces inflammation, and enhances insulin sensitivity. All of these effects reduce the risk of developing coronary artery disease. The opposite is also true. Sedentary behavior is a major risk factor for heart disease. When we don't move, the heart doesn't get the stimulus to adapt and strengthen. Blood pressure tends to be higher. Weight tends to increase. Metabolic health deteriorates. The heart is designed to support an active life, and it suffers when we're inactive. I want to talk briefly about the emotional and psychological aspects of living with heart disease, because they're often overlooked in purely anatomical discussions. A heart attack is terrifying. Suddenly, an organ you've never had to think about becomes the center of your attention. You become acutely aware of every flutter, every twinge, every beat. Many people develop anxiety or even PTSD after a cardiac event. There's also the existential weight of knowing that your heart, this essential organ, has been damaged. Some people become hypervigilant, constantly monitoring their symptoms. Others go into denial, refusing to acknowledge limitations. Finding a middle path, where you take your condition seriously without letting it dominate your life, is challenging. Cardiac rehabilitation programs address this by Retry, CW, Continue, combining physical training with education and psychological support. They help people understand what their hearts can handle, gradually building confidence while also making necessary lifestyle changes. The psychological component is just as important as the physical recovery. Now let's think about the heart's relationship with breathing. These two rhythms, heartbeat and breath, are intimately connected, though they operate at different speeds. You breathe perhaps 12 to 20 times per minute. Your heart beats 60 to 100 times per minute. Yet these rhythms influence each other in subtle ways. When you inhale, the pressure in your chest cavity becomes more negative, which helps draw blood back to the heart from the veins. This increases the filling of the right side of the heart. At the same time, the expanding lungs compress the pulmonary vessels slightly, which can momentarily reduce blood flow returning to the left atrium. The net effect is that your heart rate tends to increase slightly during inhalation and decrease during exhalation. This is called respiratory sinus arrhythmia, and it's actually a sign of good cardiovascular health. It means your autonomic nervous system is working properly, fine-tuning your heart rate breath by breath. Deep, slow breathing can be used to calm the heart. When you breathe slowly and deliberately, the parasympathetic nervous system, the calming branch, becomes more active. Heart rate decreases. Blood pressure tends to drop. This is why breathing exercises are so effective for managing stress and anxiety. You're directly influencing your heart's rhythm through your breath. Let's consider the heart in extreme conditions, because this reveals just how adaptable this organ is. At high altitudes, where oxygen is scarce, the heart initially beats faster to compensate. But over days and weeks of acclimatization, other changes occur. Red blood cell production increases, allowing the blood to carry more oxygen. The heart doesn't have to work quite as hard. Mountain climbers who spend extended periods at altitude develop these adaptations, though the process takes time. In cold environments, blood vessels in the extremities constrict to preserve core body temperature. This increases the resistance the heart must pump against, raising blood pressure. This is why shoveling snow, combining physical exertion with cold exposure, can be dangerous for people with heart disease. The heart is suddenly facing increased demand and increased resistance simultaneously. In extreme heat, the body needs to dissipate heat through the skin, so blood flow to the skin increases. This can reduce blood pressure, and the heart must beat faster to maintain adequate circulation. Dehydration compounds the problem by reducing blood volume. This is why heat stroke affects the cardiovascular system so profoundly. The heart also responds to changes in posture. When you stand up quickly, gravity pulls blood toward your legs, momentarily reducing the amount of blood returning to the heart. If your cardiovascular system is healthy, it responds within seconds. Blood vessels constrict, heart rate increases, and blood pressure is maintained. But if these reflexes are impaired by certain medications, dehydration, or autonomic dysfunction, you might feel dizzy or even faint. This is called orthostatic hypotension. Athletes and dancers who train their balance and frequently change position develop particularly responsive cardiovascular reflexes. Their hearts and blood vessels adjust almost instantaneously to postural changes. It's another example of the body's remarkable ability to adapt. Let me tell you something about the heart's energy requirements that fascinates me. The heart receives only about 5% of the cardiac output, the blood it itself is pumping, through the coronary arteries. Yet this 5% is absolutely essential. The heart cannot store energy the way muscles can. It cannot rest even briefly. It must be constantly supplied with oxygen and nutrients, beat after beat, without pause. This is why coronary artery disease is so devastating. When those small arteries narrow, the heart muscle is literally being starved. Often the first symptom is angina, chest pain or discomfort that occurs during exertion when the heart's oxygen demand increases but cannot be met because of the blocked arteries. The pain typically subsides with rest, when demand decreases. But if a complete blockage occurs, the result is a heart attack, and time becomes critical. Time is muscle, as emergency physicians say. The longer the heart muscle is deprived of oxygen, the more tissue dies. Modern treatments for heart attacks have improved dramatically. If a patient reaches the hospital quickly, a blocked artery can often be opened with angioplasty, a procedure where a catheter with a balloon is threaded through the blood vessels to the blockage. The balloon is inflated to compress the plaque, and often a stent is placed to keep the artery open. This can be done within an hour of arrival in many hospitals, dramatically reducing the amount of heart muscle damage. But prevention remains the best strategy. The risk factors for coronary artery disease are well known: smoking, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, obesity, sedentary lifestyle, poor diet, chronic stress, and family history. Some of these you cannot change, others you absolutely can. The heart responds to how you live your life, day after day, year after year. Let's talk about the heart's regenerative capacity, or rather, its lack thereof. For decades, it was believed that cardiac muscle cells, cardiomyocytes, could not divide or regenerate at all in adults. The heart you were born with was the heart you'd die with, minus whatever damage accumulated along the way. Recent research has complicated this picture. It turns out that cardiomyocytes can divide, but at an extremely slow rate, perhaps 1% per year in young adults, declining to less than 0.5% per year by age 75. This means the heart has some regenerative capacity, but it's woefully inadequate to repair significant damage like that caused by a heart attack. This has spurred enormous interest in cardiac regenerative medicine. Can we stimulate the heart to produce more muscle cells? Can we transplant stem cells that differentiate into cardiomyocytes? Can we use biological scaffolds or growth factors to promote healing? These are active areas of research, and while we're not there yet, progress is being made. The possibility that we might one day be able to heal damaged hearts rather than just managing their decline is genuinely exciting. For now, though, the reality is that damaged heart muscle becomes scar tissue. This tissue doesn't contract. It doesn't conduct electrical signals properly. Large areas of scar can weaken the heart and disrupt its rhythm. This is why protecting the heart from injury in the first place is so crucial. The heart's anatomy also includes the coronary veins, which are often overlooked. While the coronary arteries deliver oxygenated blood to the heart muscle, the coronary veins collect the deoxygenated blood. Most of this blood drains into a large vessel called the coronary sinus, which empties directly into the right atrium. Some smaller veins, called Thebesian veins, drain directly into the heart chambers. It's a complete circulatory loop, dedicated solely to keeping the heart itself alive. There's something humbling about contemplating this. The heart, which pumps blood to every other organ, must also receive blood itself. It cannot function without its own dedicated blood supply. It's simultaneously servant and master, dependent and indispensable. Let's consider the heart's size and efficiency in a comparative context. A blue whale's heart weighs about 180 kilograms, 400 pounds, and beats just 8 to 10 times per minute when the whale is diving. A hummingbird's heart weighs a fraction of a gram and beats more than 1,200 times per minute during flight. Yet both hearts are perfectly adapted to their owner's needs. The human heart sits somewhere in the middle, balancing efficiency with power and endurance with responsiveness. What's remarkable is that the fundamental architecture is the same: 4 chambers, valves to ensure one-way flow, specialized muscle tissue, an electrical conduction system. Evolution has refined this design over hundreds of millions of years, making adjustments for size and metabolic demands, but keeping the basic blueprint intact. It's a design that works. The heart is also surprisingly tolerant of minor imperfections. Small septal defects, holes in the wall between chambers, are sometimes present from birth and may never cause problems. Extra electrical pathways can exist without causing arrhythmias. Slight valve leaks are common and often benign. The heart has redundancy and reserve built in, which provides a margin of safety. But this tolerance has limits. Eventually, even minor problems can compound. A small valve leak can worsen over time, causing the heart to work harder, leading to chamber enlargement, which puts more stress on the valve, creating a vicious cycle. This is why regular checkups matter, especially as we age. Catching problems early, when they're still manageable, can prevent more serious complications later. Now let's talk about the heart transplant, because it's a testament to both the heart's anatomy and our understanding of it. The first successful human heart transplant was performed in 1967 by Dr. Christian Barnard in South Africa. The patient survived 18 days before dying of pneumonia. It was a beginning. Today, heart transplantation is a routine, though still complex procedure. The recipient's diseased heart is removed, except for the back walls of the atria where the veins connect. The donor heart is then sewn in place, connecting the aorta, pulmonary artery, and the atria. Blood flows through, and if all goes well, the new heart begins beating. What's extraordinary is that this transplanted heart will beat without any nerve connections to the recipient's brain. Remember, the heart generates its own rhythm through the SA node. It doesn't need the nervous system to tell it to beat. The recipient loses the fine-tuned control that the autonomic nervous system normally provides. The transplanted heart can't speed up quite as quickly in response to emotion or stress, but it beats nonetheless. Some recipients say they can't feel anxiety in their chest anymore because the nervous pathways that would normally make their heart race in response to fear are no longer connected. Heart transplant recipients must take immunosuppressive drugs for the rest of their lives to prevent rejection, which carries its own risks. But for people with end-stage heart failure, it can be life-saving. And the fact that we can remove one person's heart, place it in another person's chest, and have it work is a remarkable achievement. Let's think about the heart's relationship with sleep. When you sleep, your heart rate typically decreases by 10 to 20 beats per minute. Blood pressure drops. The heart gets as close to resting as it ever does. This nightly recovery period is essential for cardiovascular health. People who chronically don't get enough sleep have higher rates of hypertension, heart disease, and stroke. Sleep apnea, a condition where breathing repeatedly stops and starts during sleep, is particularly hard on the heart. Each apneic episode causes oxygen levels to drop and carbon dioxide to rise. The person partially wakes, often without remembering it. The sympathetic nervous system activates, heart rate and blood pressure spike, and then the cycle repeats. Over time, this places enormous strain on the cardiovascular system. Treating sleep apnea, often with a CPAP machine that keeps the airway open, can significantly reduce cardiovascular risk. The heart also responds to our circadian rhythms. Heart attacks are more common in the morning, partly because blood pressure and clotting factors increase after waking. Sudden cardiac death also follows a circadian pattern. The body's internal clock influences cardiovascular function in ways we're still working to fully understand. Let me share something about the heart's appearance that isn't often discussed. In textbooks, the heart is usually shown clean and idealized, but a real heart, especially in an older adult, is covered in a layer of yellow fat. The coronary arteries are partially embedded in this epicardial fat. The surface can be irregular, with areas of scarring or discoloration. It doesn't look like the neat diagrams. It looks like an organ that has been working for decades, bearing the marks of its labor. This adipose tissue isn't just passive storage. Epicardial fat is metabolically active and can influence the underlying heart muscle. Excessive epicardial fat is associated with increased risk of coronary artery disease and atrial fibrillation. It's another way that overall body weight and metabolic health affect the heart. The heart's weight also changes throughout life. It's proportionally larger in infants and decreases relative to body size as we grow. In middle age, it may increase slightly again, particularly if blood pressure rises or if we gain weight. Very old hearts sometimes atrophy slightly as muscle mass is lost. The heart is not static, it's constantly remodeling in response to the demands placed upon it. Let's consider the heart's relationship with other organs. The kidneys, for instance, are intimately connected with cardiac function. The kidneys regulate blood volume and blood pressure through their control of salt and water balance. When the heart weakens and cardiac output decreases, the kidneys sense reduced blood flow and try to compensate by retaining salt and water. This increases blood volume, which should theoretically increase cardiac output. But if the heart is already failing, the extra volume just causes more congestion and swelling. It's a well-intentioned response that backfires. This cardio-renal interaction works both ways. Kidney disease causes hypertension and fluid retention, stressing the heart. Heart failure reduces kidney function. Often both organs decline together in a phenomenon called cardio-renal syndrome. Treating one requires considering the other. The liver too is affected by heart function. In right-sided heart failure, blood backs up into the veins that drain into the right atrium, including the hepatic veins from the liver. The liver becomes congested and enlarged, unable to drain properly. Over time, this can lead to liver damage and scarring, cardiac cirrhosis. The heart's failure ripples outward, affecting distant organs. Even the gut is influenced by cardiac function. Reduced cardiac output means reduced blood flow to the intestines, which can impair digestion and absorption. Some heart failure patients develop cardiac cachexia, severe weight loss and muscle wasting, partly because their compromised circulation affects their to obtain nutrients from food. The heart sits at the center of a web of interconnections. No organ functions in isolation. This is why treating heart disease requires a holistic approach, considering the whole person, not just the cardiovascular system. Let me tell you about the heart's electrical remodeling, because this is a process that occurs constantly, often without our awareness. The heart's electrical properties adapt to changing conditions. If you develop atrial fibrillation, for instance, the abnormal electrical activity causes changes in the atrial cells themselves. Ion channels, the proteins that control the flow of charged particles in and out of cells, become altered. The atria become electrically remodeled in ways that make it easier for atrial fibrillation to persist. This is why it's often said that AFib begets AFib. The longer the abnormal rhythm continues, the harder it becomes to restore normal rhythm. But electrical remodeling can also work in reverse. When normal rhythm is restored and maintained, the atria can gradually remodel back toward normal electrical properties. The heart is plastic, changeable, and responsive. Similarly, the ventricles can undergo electrical remodeling after a heart attack. The scar tissue doesn't conduct electricity normally, which can create areas of slow conduction or blocked conduction. This can set up conditions for re-entrant arrhythmias, where electrical signals circle around the scar, creating dangerous rapid rhythms. This is one reason why patients who've had heart attacks are at increased risk for sudden cardiac death, sometimes years after the initial event. As we move toward closing, I want to reflect on what it means to have a heart, not metaphorically, but literally. You carry within you this fist-sized organ that has been beating since before you were born, before you had thoughts or memories or any sense of self. Your heart was there first, working in the darkness, preparing your body for life. And it will be there until the end, beating its steady rhythm through every experience, every emotion, every success and failure, and every joy and sorrow. Your heart doesn't judge, it doesn't pause in disappointment or accelerate in pride. Well, not without appropriate physiological signals anyway. It simply continues, fulfilling its function with mechanical persistence. There's something both humbling and profound about this. We spend so much time focused on our minds, our thoughts, and our consciousness. But beneath it all, sustaining everything, is this tireless muscle, moving blood, delivering oxygen, removing waste, and keeping the whole complex system alive. Without it, consciousness itself would not be possible. The heart asks very little of us. It wants an adequate blood supply through the coronary arteries. It wants reasonable blood pressure, not too high, not too low. It wants blood that flows smoothly, neither too thick nor too thin. It wants a steady supply of oxygen, nutrients, and the right balance of electrolytes. Given these modest requirements, it will work faithfully for decades. What damages the heart is chronic excess and deprivation. Too much pressure, too much sugar, too much cholesterol, too much stress, too little movement, too little rest, too little attention to warning signs. The heart is remarkably forgiving, but it's not invincible. The choices we make, what we eat, how we move, how we manage stress, whether we smoke, how much we sleep, accumulate over time, either supporting cardiac health or undermining it. But even damaged hearts can often be helped. Weight loss, if needed, reduces the workload. Exercise strengthens the muscle and improves efficiency. Blood pressure control prevents harmful remodeling. Medications can support function, control rhythm, and prevent clots. The heart responds to positive changes, sometimes remarkably so. I think there's something hopeful in this. The heart is not a fixed entity, doomed or blessed by genetics alone. It's a living, responsive organ that adapts to how we treat it. We have more influence over our cardiac health than we sometimes realize. Not complete control, some things are beyond our influence, but meaningful agency nonetheless. As we close, I want you to take a moment and simply notice your heartbeat. You might need to be still and quiet to feel it. Maybe you'll sense it in your chest, that gentle tap against your ribs. Maybe you'll feel it in your wrist if you check your pulse. Maybe you'll just imagine it, that steady rhythm continuing beneath your awareness. That beat has been happening all night as we've been talking. It's happened through every word, every paragraph, every idea we've explored together. And it will continue after you finish listening, as you drift towards sleep, as your breathing slows and your muscles relax. Your heart will keep working through the night, moving blood, sustaining life, and asking nothing in return. In about 70 years of life, your heart will beat approximately 2.5 billion times. Each beat moves about 70 milliliters of blood. Over a lifetime, that's hundreds of millions of liters. It's almost incomprehensible. This organ, smaller than your fist, moves an ocean of blood through your vessels, reaching every cell, sustaining every thought, and powering every movement. The heart is not romantic. It doesn't understand poetry or appreciate irony. It doesn't care about your dreams or your regrets. It's a pump, mechanical and precise, operating according to the laws of physiology and physics. And yet somehow, this makes it even more worthy of wonder. Because this pump, this bundle of specialized muscle cells, electrical conduction pathways, valves and chambers, arteries and veins, makes everything else possible. Every conversation, every connection, every moment of consciousness depends on this tireless organ continuing its work. The heart is the quiet foundation beneath the noise of living. So tonight, as you rest, carry this awareness with you. Your heart is working for you right now. It has always worked for you. It will continue working for you asking only that you treat it with a modicum of care and attention. Listen to it when it signals distress. Support it with movement and nourishment. Give it the rest it needs. The human heart is not particularly glamorous. It doesn't have the complexity of the brain or the elegance of the eye. It's just a pump, built of meat and electricity, bound by the limitations of biology. But it's your pump, and it's keeping you alive right now, in this moment, and in every moment to come. That's the boring anatomy of the human heart, beautiful in its simplicity, powerful in its persistence, essential beyond measure. May yours beat strong and steady for many years to come. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight. Rest well.